Well, hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining today's workshop. Before we begin, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that this workshop is being recorded for internal use only. You can find a copy of the workshop agenda and the speaker bios on the meeting's website. You will also find the agendas for workshops 2 and 3. Attendees are muted and will not be able to turn on their video. Live captions can be turned on by clicking more at the bottom of your screen and then click View Captions. Presenters are asked to turn their videos on when it is their time to present, and to stay on schedule, presenters will receive a verbal warning when they are approaching the end of their allotted time. Finally, please submit any questions using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Questions will be monitored by the moderator and the workshop co-chairs and answered by the panelists or presenters. You may submit questions at any time during the workshop. If you could go to the next slide. There will be polls shown throughout the workshop. The results of each poll will be shown in a Word cloud. Please submit responses by scanning the QR code or by entering the code at menti.com. You can submit either one-word responses or short phrases. If you have any questions or if you are experiencing technical difficulties, please send me a message using the chat function. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Janaya. Can you go to the next slide? Excellent. Well, greetings, everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Mike Sterrett, and on behalf of our meeting co-sponsors, the NIH Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research and the NIH Adherence Network, we welcome you and we thank you for being here. Our workshop today will address behavior maintenance approaches in clinical and community settings. We're very excited to put this workshop together, and we look forward to your participation and your input in today's meeting. Next slide. So as Janaya has mentioned, we'd like to keep this meeting as interactive as possible. So we are going to conduct some polls throughout our meeting, and we thought we'd start right here at the top. So you see this poll question, and actually what we'd like you to do is to connect to our poll. It's called a Menti poll, and you can connect to the poll one of two ways. You can either use your smartphone to scan the QR code that appears on your screen, or you can take your web browser on your computer, and you can navigate to www.menti.com. That's MENTI.com. And then you can enter the code that you see on the screen here. Our code is 42279340. So you have two ways of accessing the poll. We invite you to go ahead and get connected now. And our first question to you is a very simple one. Where are you joining us from today? You could choose to tell us either your city or your state or your country, whatever you like. And thank you. Thank you in advance for your answers. We'll be excited to see where our audience is from today. Now, while you are connecting to our poll and inputting those answers, let me go ahead and just tell you a little bit more about our meeting. Next slide. So we are very interested in this topic and this challenge of health behavior maintenance. We see health behavior maintenance as sustaining a newly established health behavior by being able to perform it consistently over time and across contexts and as needed. And this could apply to any kind of health behavior, whether it's a behavior that one has to actively perform, like keeping up with an exercise regimen, taking prescribed medications regularly, or keeping up with glucose monitoring. Or it might also be a behavior that one tries to avoid, like reducing use of alcohol or drugs. The NIH has funded many different research projects which have helped to advance programs to support people with their health behavior maintenance, but the impact of these intervention programs often decays with time. So to meet this challenge, we've been interested to understand how we could better conceptualize, measure, monitor, and support people's maintenance of health behaviors over the long term. On the next slide, you'll meet the smiling faces of our planning group, each of whom you'll meet at different points during today's meeting. We have our esteemed external co-chairs, Dr. Ann Peters, a professor of clinical medicine at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California. Also, Dr. Alex Rothman, a professor of psychology at the University of Minnesota. And for the NIH, our leads are Maureen Monahan Center, Program Director in Diabetes Behavioral Science at NIDDK. We also have Sydney O'Connor and Deborah Young-Hyman, Health Scientist Administrators from the NIH OBSSR. And then there's myself. I'm a Program Officer and a Senior Behavioral Scientist at the NIMH Division of AIDS Research. We're also very glad to have the involvement of many members of our NIH Adherence Network. That's an internal NIH group that's focused on adherence research, and one that Maureen and I co-chair with Deborah in a senior advisor role. Next slide. So today's meeting is a part of a workshop series. Some of you may have attended some of our prior sessions, and others of you may be joining us anew today. We're glad you're here. Our prior meetings have really centered on theory and scientific research on behavior maintenance. And these include a workshop on the conceptualization of behavior maintenance that we held last spring. And then 2 workshops last fall, which addressed the measurement of behavioral maintenance and developing programs and interventions to support behavioral maintenance. Dr. Alex Rothman will tell us briefly about some high points from these prior workshops before we're done today. But today's meeting is really different from all of the rest. And that's because we're going to take a break from our deep research focus to instead examine how real people and real programs in the real world are addressing the challenge of health behavior maintenance. Next slide. So in today's meeting, we're going to hear 2 kinds of perspectives. And the first is a set of personal perspectives on health behavior maintenance. This will come from a panel of people who are living with chronic health conditions, as well as a set of clinicians who care for them. Then on this afternoon, we'll explore perspectives on the implementation of evidence-based behavioral maintenance programs in real-world settings to understand their opportunities and challenges in their operation. I think these are going to be very fascinating discussions. Next slide. We do have our agenda, which is available on our website. I think we'll put a link to that in the chat. And I think for time's sake, I'm just going to scoot through these slides here. Our morning panel will focus on some opening comments from Dr. Jane Simone, and then we'll have our panel with perspectives from persons with chronic conditions and the clinicians who support them. Next slide. In our second panel, we'll have exemplars of behavioral maintenance approaches that have been implemented in community and clinical settings. These include programs working on diabetes, on HIV, and on physical activity in diverse settings like YMCA health clinics, also HIV outpatient clinics, and church and faith-based organizations. And then finally, on the next slide, we'll have some capstone comments from Dr. Alex Rothman, as well as myself and Deborah Young-Hyman. Next slide. So to return to our opening question, where are you joining from today? If you haven't had a chance to connect to our Menti poll, you could go ahead and do that now. Again, you can connect either by scanning the QR code with your smartphone or by navigating your web browser to menti.com and entering our code 42279340. And we're very eager to learn where everybody is from today. And so for our next step, let's take a look at our live poll results. Janaya, can you bring those up? Outstanding. Thank you very much. Well, look at this. This is just fantastic. We already have more than 75 people who are responding to our poll live and in real time. These results are displayed as a word cloud. And in a word cloud, responses that have a greater number of mentions are represented by a larger word, a word that's somewhat larger than the others. And as I look at this, I see 2 things right off the bat. The first is that our responses continue to come in. You see the cloud adjust a little bit as new responses come in. But then I also see that we have people from both across the United States, and it looks to me like even around the world here. We see some major responses from people that are located in and around Chicago, Los Angeles, South Carolina, Michigan, California, Virginia. And then as we look at these other responses, which might come from individuals, places like Minneapolis, St. Augustine, Florida, Winston-Salem, Jackson, Mississippi, San Francisco. And also here, we also see responses from Quebec, Montreal, and Canada. So welcome to our neighbors from the north. And someone who's in transit to Baltimore, Maryland. So that's great. Oh, Geneva is here. Welcome. Well, we're just delighted. And what this shows is the broad interest in this challenge, this opportunity to explore and examine the issue of behavior maintenance, how widespread the interest is in this across the country and even around the world. So we're so glad that you're with us today, and thank you for being here. People can continue to answer their questions, but we're going to go ahead and advance to our next segment. So I'll return to our slides here, and we're excited to welcome our keynote speaker, who's Dr. Jane Simoni. Dr. Jane Simoni is the NIH Associate Director for Behavioral and Social Sciences Research. She's also the Director of the NIH Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, OBSSR. And Jane is a very longstanding and well-respected health behavior researcher herself. And I'm very fortunate to call her a great colleague and good friend. Welcome, Jane. We're so glad to be here. You're here today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Just checking, Mike, that you can see my slide.
We do.
Right mode. Okay, great. Well, I'm thrilled to be here and talk to you a little bit about our office and the work we do at NIH in behavior maintenance. A bit about me first. I'm a clinical psychologist. I worked in behavioral health intervention research for the 30 years of my academic career, most recently at the University of Washington for 23 years. I joined the office here at NIH last summer, where I'm the director, and I'm also the NIH Associate Director for Behavioral and Social Sciences Research. Our office opened in 1995 with the mission to enhance the impact of health-related behavioral and social sciences research. And how do we do that? By events like this, identifying projects that should be supported, developing and coordinating them across all the 27 ICOs at the NIH, the institutes and centers and offices, integrating BSSR within a larger enterprise and communicating what we find both within NIH and beyond. And our vision is a world in which this synergistic integration of behavioral and social sciences with biomedical research leads to accelerated scientific discovery, better treatment and health promotion interventions, and equitable implementation for all. And why do we do that? BSSR shapes health policies and improves health outcomes in all different dimensions, both in HIV, as I talked about being involved in, but smoking cessation, physical activity, dietary interventions. It's part of all that we do. And I know I'm speaking to the choir today of those of you interested in health maintenance. And at the NIH, we've been interested in behavior maintenance for over 20 years. We've led or coordinated key efforts here, including the Behavior Change Consortium. We've had funding opportunities in dissemination and implementation science, which are critical to behavior maintenance. The Common Fund at NIH and the Office of the Director funded a Science of Behavior Change program for years. And we have a study section specifically focusing on dissemination and implementation science. Finally, led by our office, is a training institute for dissemination and implementation research and health. In terms of current challenges and strategic priorities, we have had success in developing and delivering effective and sustainable health behavior maintenance approaches to people, but outside of research settings, it has been challenging. I can think of my own research, actually, in HIV medication adherence, which I did for several years in terms of my NIH-funded projects. It was a difficult proposition. Folks that had few resources in a lot of ways had a stigmatizing condition with HIV. They didn't even tell some of their own family members about it. And yet they had to take often daily medication to remain healthy. And over time, we found we did intervention studies that in the control group, if you did nothing over time, adherence levels just declined. And we sometimes would say if you had a successful intervention, even if you could just not decline as much as the control group, you would be making some progress. And what we learned from this is, number one, you had to have a really evidence-based intervention that was theory supported, that often helped. You had to talk with the community. You had to have community involved and listening so that you could come up with an intervention that would be likely to be sustained in the community. And finally, we learned that it's not easy to do this work. It requires a big group of interdisciplinary scientists and a lot of support to be able to encourage and treat medication adherence over the long haul. And I think that's true. And in some ways, taking a medication is easier than the things we're trying to do with other diseases. I think about diabetes, where it's not just the medications you have to take, but blood monitoring, diet and exercise. So a lot of conditions, a lot of chronic conditions today, they have really big challenges in terms of prioritizing behavior maintenance, change, and especially maintenance. So in response, in January 2022, our office and the NIH-wide Adherence Network adopted behavior maintenance as one of their scientific priorities. And we were uniquely positioned to be able to do this because we could examine biobehavioral mechanisms and processes involved in treating the range of diseases across the NIH. And integrating behavioral approaches into biomedical interventions to try to improve population health and reduce disparities is a core part of our strategic plan at the office. And finally, health behavior maintenance fits squarely within our scientific goals at OBSSR. The program of scientific initiatives include prior NIH efforts, and they also integrate new knowledge about behavioral, biological, and technology-driven interventions. So the program here uses a systematic approach to better understand processes and pathways of behavior maintenance. And these include, as Mike talked about in the other workshops, updating the conceptual frameworks, examining evaluation and measurement strategies, identifying mechanisms of action and contextual factors, improving multi-level treatment approaches, and then promoting community and clinical intervention approaches to reduce disparities. The goal of the workshop series is to develop a more complete understanding of health behavior maintenance and to promote and sustain health outcomes. As Mike said, this is the fourth and final workshop in this series, and the central theme of today's workshop is adaptation of evidence-based behavioral approaches into clinical and community settings. So in terms of future research opportunities we hope will emerge from today, I hope that we'll continue to incorporate the wisdom of lived experience, and that will have an impact on improving our future research. Contextualizing interventions within social determinants of health, I think, is a theme that we're going to hear. And then using new therapeutics and technological advances to inform just-in-time interventions to sustain behavior maintenance. And finally, we hope to enhance the rigor and success of behavioral science by applying our updated understanding of behavior maintenance to research and clinical practice. Before I stop, I just want to give a note of thanks to the panelists who are presenting at this workshop, especially the community members and all the clinicians who participated, to our research speakers and all the work they've done in this area, and particularly to our planning committee that Mike pointed out in the entire NIH Adherence Network. Foremost, to you all listening, you in attendance, for your interest in this topic. I hope you will continue to support this work, and I know that together we can advance the science and improve health. I'll close with our QR codes. You can learn a little bit more about our office and the resources we have available to support investigators. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the conference.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simoni, for that fantastic starting presentation. We really appreciate it, and for all of your support for this effort. So hello, everyone. I'm Sydney O'Connor, and I'm one of the co-leads of this workshop series. Before we begin the first panel of the day, I'd like to introduce the next Mentimeter poll. So in the first panel session, we'll hear from individuals with lived experiences, as well as clinicians who support individuals with their journey to health behavior maintenance. And during this first panel session, we really call upon you, the audience, to actively listen and reflect on the presenter's words and to respond via this next poll. And this poll, question 2, asks, what are you hearing from the individual and clinician panelists regarding factors that support health behavior maintenance? And again, as Mike explained before, you can navigate to the menti.com URL here and enter that same code, or you can use your smartphone to scan the QR code. And you can enter a word or a short phrase to respond to this prompt. You can enter more than one response as you listen to the different panelists in this first session. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ann Peters, Professor of Clinical Medicine and co-chair of the Behavior Maintenance Workshop Series, who will be leading panel 1. Please take it away, Ann.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone, and thank you to the NIH for putting on this conference. As a provider who treats people with only one condition, diabetes, and follows her clients for years, I know firsthand about the challenges of long-term behavior maintenance. I see everything from the people for whom managing a chronic disease seems effortless to those who have struggled since diagnosis. And I also work in two worlds, on the affluent west side of Los Angeles and in the medically under-resourced East Los Angeles. For my East Los Angeles clients, the social determinants of health and the stress they cause are often the obvious reasons for difficulty in disease management. Worries about housing, food insecurity, employment, and safety, among other issues, often limit an individual's ability to focus on glucose levels. But regardless of where I work, there are attributes I see in certain people that I wish I could clone in others. When I see a person struggling, I want to better understand how to help them. My hope is that through collaboration and collective research, we can discover different ways to help people achieve their goals in the short term and over the rest of their lives, which is why our wonderful panelists and you participants are here today to begin to address these issues more formally. Now, I'm a storyteller, and if you could show me the one picture that I have, the slide of that sweet man. Can we see the slide? I saw it earlier. That one. Okay. So this is one of my long-term patients, and his name is Drew. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 3 in 1948. At diagnosis and throughout his life, he has lived in a rural, medically underserved area with no endocrinologists. His parents were told he wouldn't live past the age of 30. He nearly went blind from his diabetes and almost died on 5 different occasions, including 1 cardiac arrest and a toxic megacolon, which resulted in a permanent colostomy. Yet he has loved and lived and advocated for better health care and has had a life he finds very fulfilling. Additionally, he is without question the best controlled person with type 1 diabetes I have in my practice, on the east side, on the west side, anywhere. He is the most amazing example of sustained behavior maintenance I have ever seen. At 79, he has adopted all the new diabetes technologies, is on an automated insulin delivery system, and actually makes it seem easy. He lives up in Lone Pine in the mountains. He goes hiking. He's phenomenal. So I asked him what he thought made him so successful, and he sent me a list. And this is what he said. First and foremost, he is successful because of his wife, who's his advocate, caretaker, proofreader, and driver to and from the ER. He also lists the support of friends and family, using technology that allows him to chart cause and effect, the ability to pick healthcare providers, education, reading a lot about everything, critical thinking, active listening, doing his own cooking and measuring everything he eats, no alcohol, tobacco, or recreational drugs, planning ahead for things he can't plan for, always having glucose tablets in his pocket, being open about his diabetes, taking responsibility for his own health, not blaming anyone else for what he experiences, asking questions, staying curious, preparing for doctor appointments with questions and health records, assuming nothing, researching everything an expert tells you, and choosing caregivers that are liked and respected by their staff and colleagues. So that is Drew's list. I am sure that everyone has their own list of strategies for success, as well as their own barriers, and I think we can all learn from each other. I learn every day from the people I have the honor to treat. Today, we have the unique opportunity of hearing from 3 amazing panelists with lived experience with chronic conditions. But before we speak directly with our panelists, let's watch a short video that will introduce each of them. The video will be a little more than 10 minutes, and I want you to listen carefully so you can hear their words and begin to enter your responses into our poll. Thank you.
Hi, my name is James Zervios, and I'm the Obesity Action Coalition's Chief Operating Officer. Obesity Action Coalition, or OAC, is a nonprofit patient advocacy organization based in the United States, and we've been around for about 20 years. But I've personally dealt with obesity my entire life, and it's something that I managed to this day with behavioral modifications. In my personal life, I'm a husband to my wife Danielle, who's a 5th grade school teacher, as well as a father to my son Nicholas, who's about to go into kindergarten. And I really find this cause to be a very rewarding one, but I find the disease to be a very challenging one. And I've dealt with this my entire life and really struggle with weight and work very hard at it through behavior modification. But this is not an easy thing to deal with, and I look forward to talking more about this with you all.
Greetings. My name is Indigo. In November, I will be 73 years old. I retired twice, first from a long career in international development, and second as a long-time HIV and health advocate. I am one of 8 siblings of my late mother and father, and I have 1 daughter and 1 almost 9-year-old grandson. I have undergraduate and graduate degrees. However, most of my education came from my parents and other family, my community, and the national and global community of health advocates. I enjoy people and relationship and community building and nurturing and facilitating connection between people, organizations, and institutions. I also love storytelling and storytellers. I enjoy art and culture, music of different genres, traveling, and reading. I am a person with HIV for 38 years now, nearly half of my entire life. As a long-term survivor, I am facing many comorbidities and related health conditions that I have to manage. I'm also a cancer survivor. I'm a diabetic. Like most, for many years, I managed a huge pill load that included experimental drugs and as a participant in many clinical trials. I actively sought alternative and complementary healing strategies over the years that I incorporated into my biomedical and conventional regimen. My healing has included massage, acupuncture, yoga, walking, and dancing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chip Hawkins. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this event. I'm looking forward to talking to everybody. I just wanted to start with a brief introduction, as we were asked to do. I work full-time. I manage a lab in a research university where I work with genetic engineering. My life is pretty much taken up with a mix of work, dealing with my disease, and my hobbies, which for me include travel. I like to get out of the country whenever I can. I've made it to Africa once or twice, and a few other countries. So that's my passion, but of course there's some cost involved with that, so I don't do it often. I also enjoy reading a lot, science fiction, history, historical fiction, just a wide variety of topics. So my condition, my medical condition is cystic fibrosis. It's something that you're born with. It's a genetic condition, so I've had it all my life. I was diagnosed at 3, so that's about when I started being treated. And I do remember the early days of being treated and working out a routine from then on. So that's me. I do spend a lot of time a day dealing with CF. Maybe 2 hours or so are devoted towards just CF care.
For me, when I realized that my weight was really impacting my health, I had come back from my honeymoon. And I remember saying to my wife when I was looking at pictures, have I gained that much weight? Don't think I realized it. And of course, being the loving wife she is, she said, no, you're very handsome, you look great. But I knew I wasn't comfortable, and I knew this was something that I needed to kind of take a look at more and get some help with. And I remember going to my doctor and talking to them, and we did some labs, and they came back and they said, hey, you're pre-hypertensive, you could potentially be pre-diabetes. Diabetes runs very strong in my family, as does kidney disease. And so I just kind of took all that in, and I said, okay, I have to make some changes. I have to make some healthy changes here. And really in that moment, started to address my weight in the best way possible, and to kind of listen to my body a little bit more, and to look at what I was eating, when I was eating, why I was eating, and to not have the stressors be the trigger to eat. So don't eat when you're just stressed out about something or you're craving something sweet, but are you hungry? And really trying to listen to myself a little bit more. But then also realize that you have to enjoy life every now and then. There's plenty of times that my son will say, hey, do you want to get ice cream or something like that? And I wouldn't trade those moments for anything. And so I do, and I indulge, and and I don't beat myself up about it. And I just remember that, this is not something that I do every single day or every single night, but to enjoy those moments, and to recognize the accomplishments that I've made in my weight loss, and how hard I work to maintain that weight loss.
Some of the things that have made it difficult for me to maintain my health behaviors over time are the following. Stigma was a huge barrier for me to overcome. I had to find a way to avail myself of tools and resources while at the same time manage my fears, concerns about privacy and confidentiality. Pill burden and side effects. While the number and size of pills have decreased substantially over time, the burden of taking medicines every day for many years is something that is still not automatic. Family care responsibilities. I was a primary caregiver for my mother, who lived with me and transitioned just a year ago at the age of 100. My own health faltered during that time. Stress around financial security and aging needs, and the high and ever rising costs of insurance is very unsettling. Managing many physicians and specialists, appointments, and attention to consistent self-care.
The big thing is it's time for me. I have to do some airway clearance in the morning before I go to work, which means I have to get up earlier than most people to get to work. And then when I get home from work, I need to do more airway clearance and take some other medicine by inhaled nebulizers. So a big part of it is just time, and finding time to both, have a life and also deal with my cystic fibrosis.
I love to exercise, but as we all get older, that seems to be a little bit tougher to work into the daily routine. But I love to exercise, to run and lift weights. And so today I really use that in that behavioral management approach to my weight loss. I've maintained upwards of 65 pounds lost now for about 7, maybe 10 years. I really am not sure exactly how long now. But again, also understanding that life is going to have ups and downs, and that there's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days, and how do we make it through them, and how do we use food to help fuel us for those good and bad days.
What are some of the things that help me to maintain health behaviors over time? Exercising discipline, which is an ongoing battle with myself. Now that I live alone, I control what foods are in my house. I know myself and know that it is difficult for me to moderate those things that are good to me, but not for me. For example, I completely gave up refined sugars and sweets in January, and now I don't miss them. I keep a thermos of water with me at all times, and drink very little juices. I've chosen a couple things to eat that gives me pleasure and allowed myself to have them at times. Stove popped popcorn is a favorite. I use a sensor for monitoring my blood sugars and find it to be very helpful. I make sure that I walk and dance regularly. Listening to audiobooks and podcasts make me want to walk even more. I keep my pills in a pill box that are right next to my favorite chair where I take my main meals. It is those times that I take my meds. I am active with my many physicians and utilize the portals regularly. Telehealth is very helpful to me and reduces anxiety around travel times and distances. I am empowered to speak up and ask questions of my physicians. HIV advocacy has helped me with that. I know what brings me joy, so I make sure that I incorporate in my life time with friends and family, travel, and other things that I enjoy. It helps support my mental health. I came to realize the importance of community with those with shared experiences. That community strengthens me and my own resolve in ways that have been safe, compassionate, and loving. My inner faith and spirit are strong. I aim to be positive and to give to others, and I am consciously working on maintaining a balanced life where I center and prioritize my own care.
What helps maintain healthy behaviors over time, mostly it's having a routine. So when I wake up in the morning, I don't think, oh, should I do this or not? I just do it. And I've built this routine over 20, 30 years well, 50 years. But when I was born, there wasn't much to do with CF, and there wasn't really much of a routine to be had until about maybe 30 years ago. So as new medications became available and new therapies were added, I added them in. And so I built up this longer and longer routine. And so that probably helped in that I didn't like get hit with it when I was like this age now, saying here's 2 or 3 hours of stuff you have to start doing. So I was able to build a routine over time, but definitely a routine is required. And then the other thing is my closest friends, the friends I hang with a lot and travel with a lot, know my routines and respect them. And when we're making plans, they're very good about making space for my medical routines, my CF, into our plans. So they're very generous in doing this, and we all get along well because of it, I think. So that's me in a nutshell. I hope I've introduced myself well enough, and I look forward to talking to everybody or whoever is going to be watching this. I'm glad I could introduce myself.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That's the second time I heard this video, and I love it even more the second time. So now I want to see all of you because I'm going to ask you questions, and you guys have seen the questions, so nothing's going to be a surprise. But I'm also going to call on you just to maintain some sort of order. So let's see. I'm looking at like 20 screens at the same time. All right, so I guess I'll ask Chip first because he's first on my screen. So I know you've all mentioned several challenges you've encountered while trying to sustain healthy behaviors over time, but I now want you to pick one, your greatest challenge. And I also want you to talk about whether or not that's something that is an ongoing recurrent issue or whether it's something that you just experienced once. And then how did you get out of it or resolve it or somehow come to peace with it? So Chip, I'll start with you to have your comments on that.
Hi, thanks for asking me. I really don't have a problem with the medication part of my routine because I've made such a good routine over my lifetime. But the thing I want to add to my routine that would benefit me with my CF is more exercise. And I've really struggled over my whole life doing all my CF care plus doing exercise, which would help with CF and the rest of me. And I have never been able to figure out a way to create a lifelong routine by adding this. So some things I try is I join a gym and that helps for a while. But then I drop off and stop going to the gym, or I hire a trainer, and that helps for a while. But then we part ways. So I still am trying to make it part of my life routine by, say, between work and home gym, and that helps for a while. But I know that I need to make it a part of my routine. But for some reason, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. I continuously have trouble trying to add it to my routine. So I feel like my 2 to 3 hours of CF care has kind of maxed out my willingness to make a routine, and it bugs me because I want to make it part of my routine. So that I'm hooked to benefit from the stuff that you guys figure out and how to add more. But mostly, I think I just need to keep trying. Like I've never decided I'm going to give it up. I always recognize that this will be beneficial, and I always recognize that I want to add it as a further step. And I keep trying to find ways. I keep trying to see what's going to help me make it a part of the routine. But mostly, I don't want to swap out exercise for something else. I want to just keep trying to make it a part. And I think that's what's important for me, is to just recognize its importance and recognize my desire to make it a part of my life. And that's helping me work at it. But I also don't belittle myself when I fail, because I recognize that it is a very large time component already, and I don't feel I should be myself or feeling depressed that I can't improve.
Yeah,
So
I
I think
think
it's a
you-
matter of recognizing.
I just think you need
I'm sorry.
3 more hours in the day, because it seems to me like you pack each day filled with as much stuff as possible. But I also want to tell you that I don't have to do something for 3 hours every day, and I still have trouble exercising, and I know I believe in it and I want to. So definitely don't beat yourself up too much, because I think all of us have exercise on our list, and unless you're like a triathlete, it's hard to actually remember or find time to do it. I meant to do it last night, but I was too busy preparing for this. Indigo, would you like to answer? What's your greatest challenge that you've ever had, and then how have you felt you've overcome it? But also, has it come back recurrently, or is it something you sort of got through once and then, solved?
Yeah, so of the three, I have three long-term, very serious conditions. And of the three, being HIV, cancer, and diabetes, I think HIV presented the biggest challenge to me over the 38 years that I've been living with it. And I identify the main reason that I have been so challenged from the beginning, and to some extent now, the factor of stigma. The role that stigma plays in every aspect of life with HIV, for sure, can't be minimized. I mean, it stopped me from even accessing care for many years, certainly traditional care. It made me fearful of my condition being disclosed, because I hadn't told anyone. I lived in secrecy and underground for a very long time, for years. And even, there was this factor that people did, they put people in different categories of HIV, of those they think should get it and those they think wouldn't get it. And so even though I was showing signs of HIV, they just didn't think, and they tell me this, that I would be one to get HIV. So they never considered that as a possibility. And frankly, I kind of took advantage of that, although, I certainly didn't like that fact that that's how people see each of us sometimes. But I did take advantage of that opportunity to hide and go on with my life without others thinking that I had HIV. Even accessing support groups, which was so important. I'm not generally a group person, but I saw the need for support groups, even to take on some new interventions in HIV, like a drug that you had to kind of like a little pistol kind of blow it into your system, and you had to learn how to use, I think it was called Fusion. But, so I had to go to a support group to learn how to do that. But I always found myself, looking behind myself, looking around corners, didn't want anyone to see me going to places. I would not go to those places that were identified as places that treat people with HIV. So at that time I wasn't accessing traditional care. So, it just dictated everything in terms of how I dealt in different spaces with family, in the workplace, with friends. And, so it was a heavy load to carry. Over time, as I got more comfortable, particularly, kind of buttressed by community of people, and access, feeling more comfortable to kind of spread out my safety zones, I felt more comfortable in even disclosing to people who needed to know. And as I've gotten older now, these times I'm more kind of concerned about how to keep certain aspects of privacy. It's so funny that because when I was diagnosed with cancer, cancer actually kind of helped me, because as stigmatized as cancer used to be, certainly in my mother's time, and they used to whisper that someone had CA or CN, they used to call it, it became, now, people aren't as fearful about using the word cancer. So I use cancer as my reason to others why I was going to doctors so often, why I was needing to take so many medications. So cancer, I won't wish that on anybody, but I use that to help me to overcome the fears and that I had, with HIV, and help me to do the things that I needed to do to make sure that I could live and thrive as I have been able to do over these years. So yeah, it was very very helpful, and and it was long term. I don't know if stigma, I guess it goes away, but it shows up in different ways and sometimes comes back and whatnot. So, but anyway, that was my biggest challenge.
Well, so Indigo, first of all, I want to come hug you. Second of all, I want you to tell me so I really believe that how you're dealt with at the beginning can set the stage for the rest of your life. And so I have patients who come to me with new onset type 1 diabetes, and my whole goal is to give them the best beginning. Because if I give them the best beginning, it starts them on the right path. Because otherwise they're in the hospital, they're terrified, they're told terrible things are going to happen, they're going blind, blah, 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 and they flip out. But I want to give them a good beginning. But how would you give somebody, and I just had a patient that I diagnosed with HIV who didn't fit any of the boxes for having it. I still don't know how he got it, but he has it. And I mean, he's completely flipped out. But what would you do to a beginner with HIV? How would you have treated you at the very beginning? What would have helped?
Well, what helped really, and I wish this for everyone, is that they find a provider who's compassionate and who has some understanding of what you're going through. For a long time, I just didn't access any traditional care because I really was afraid of even providers' responses. I mean, and I had been in situations where providers and their staff did not want to deal with me, or they put HIV very, very big on my file and whatnot. And it really forced me more underground. So I found that once I felt safe with someone, with a provider who became for many years my biggest source of confidentiality, to help me to, feel good on a given day. I mean, I guess it put a lot of weight on the provider. But infectious disease doctors, they're bless them, bless all of them, in terms of what they were dealing with. But that was really what helped me. And I think it would help everybody to be able to walk into a space of care, feel not judged, feel accepted and respected. And I think if everyone could have a first experience like that, I think that would help them to more quickly access what they need.
I agree completely. We just have to figure out how to do it. So thank you so much, Indigo. And so James, it's your turn.
Yes, and I think that, hearing from Chip and Indigo has been absolutely tremendous. And stigma is something that in the obesity community we deal with on a daily basis in every facet of life, and is also a significant barrier to care for us dealing with it. I think to answer the question, for me personally, stress has always been one of the biggest hurdles in my life that I've tried to overcome. I'm type A personality, so I really feel like I have to have control. Otherwise, I feel like it's out of control. And I've taught myself over time through behavioral approaches that there's just certain things that are in my control and there's certain things that are not in my control. And I've also tried to compartmentalize the stress appropriately, work stress, family stress. There's a difference between a huge project coming up at work versus chasing my 5-year-old son to put him in the shower at night before he's got to go to bed. Those are two different stresses, but sometimes those two worlds can come together a little bit and kind of blend. And I think learning how to manage that in a healthy way and what type of healthy behaviors I can apply to manage that stress really are key for me. I wouldn't say I've overcome it. I don't think I will ever overcome it. I think it's always one of those things that everybody deals with in life. But it definitely has impacted my weight. I find that when I am very stressed, I crave the sugary foods. I crave the quick, the chips, that type of food. I'm not craving a salad when I'm very stressed out. So I've gotten much better over time at recognizing when that's influencing my food choices, and to be able to pause for a moment and say, okay, hold on. Am I really hungry? Do I really want to eat that? And why is it that I'm going for that? Is it because I'm tired and I'm looking for that quick kind of sugar rush to just keep me up for a little bit longer? Or is it because I'm stressed and that's sort of my coping mechanism? What is it that's driving this behavior at that moment?
I have so many things I could talk to all of you about, but I guess I have to move on. But yes, because obviously weight issues are so much a part of what I do, because people with diabetes can have eating disorders. They can be normal body weight, they can be large, but it doesn't matter. They need to have an approach to weight and nutrition and health that is right for them. And for all of you, for all of us, acceptance and basically love. I tell people that's just what this is all about, is that you kind of have to love each other, but it's about sort of giving something of yourself to each other to help. But I'm going to skip a question because I know you guys have them, because I want to know the answer to this from all of you. So I have patients who do really well for a while, really well, and then something happens and they stop doing so well and they fall off the wagon, as it were, and they get really frustrated with themselves because they know what they can do, but then they realize that they're not doing it, and they kind of go into this cycle where it's really hard to get them back to where they were before. So Chip, because we're going in the same order, has there been a time when you ceased a certain health behavior for a long interval? When was that? What happened? But then how did you get back on track?
I have never had the urge to stop any of my treatments. Other than the exercise thing, which I already spoke about. This isn't a good question for me because, with CF, it's long. And if I skip, I don't think I've ever skipped a week, but if I skipped a week, I would feel like there would be an immediate change in my health. And I really, it's breathing. And so I know some people with CF stop, so maybe they would be better to ask this question, but I want to live as much longer than I can. When I was born with CF, people were dying before they were adults. And there were pamphlets in the waiting rooms that, as kids, we could read and say, hey, you're not going to live past 16. So I grew up knowing that this is a very lethal disease. And, as I kept beating the age limits, I never wanted to stop. And I considered my therapy to be a big part of that. So I never got the urge to not do it. And even if I'm traveling, I'm taking my meds with me. Emotionally, I've never had a crisis that led me to want to stop. So I probably move on because I I don't have too much to add to this. It's just, my desire is to stay healthy and live my best life as long as I can. And so my constant motivation to do all my therapeutics is that driving goal to beat the odds and keep enjoying life. So it's just
Well,
never happened to me. So
I love
I'll
that.
pass.
I love that. No, you're great at this because you put this into you as just something you're going to do without question. But I think oddly, you're lucky because you get symptoms. Because my patients with diabetes may not get a symptom. And I have patients who keep their blood sugars at 200 and 300, and they're relatively asymptomatic. And it's much harder, particularly for my East LA patients, to give insulin because they might go low. And if they go low, it's devastating because they can't go low when they're at work, and it's very hard. So it's you've got that personality who's really stuck with it because you want to live. My patients should want to live too, but they don't feel sick if they don't do it. But I'm not glad you feel sick. I'm just pointing this out, but I appreciate your answer. So Indigo, sweetie, what do you say? Wait.
Yes, the biggest, I think the eating healthily, and diabetes drove that a lot over the years, the need to do that. And it was in the face of, with HIV, you feel like so much of you is taken away and so much you don't receive in terms of pleasures. And, of course, food becomes one of those pleasures. I mean, not to be overindulgent, but, so now you get to a point where you really you have no choice but to monitor how much you, carbs and sugars and whatnot you take in. And so, for me, I have fallen off that wagon because of just fatigue, just self-discipline fatigue, I call it. You just kind of get tired of always being so mindful. You kind of look around and see everybody's eating all this stuff. It looks so good when they eat it. And that I used to also do. And, and you get kind of fatigued. And so, I've gone through those periods. It usually doesn't last more than a week or so before I, during the course of that week, I, kind of enjoy it, and I don't really enjoy it because I know I'm not supposed to be doing it. And I kind of beat myself up a bit. And then I always remind myself to set the reset button, start all over again, so you have your own kind of reset button. But I can tell you with diabetes, I think the thing that's been helpful for me in the last couple of years has been the use of the sensors, the monitoring sensors, because, when you had to prick your finger, I mean, that was also, something that you had to kind of make yourself do. And I wasn't consistent in doing that. And it didn't give me a lot of the real data that I get with the sensor. But now the sensor, of course, is, if you have sensors, how it will scream at you if you have that notification on, if you get too high or too low. And I've been in a position where I think this kind of went crazy. And I knew I just ate a piece of cake or something. But it doesn't mean I can't ever have it, but it means that I have to look at what I'm eating and moderate and bring things back within the range that I'm supposed to be in. So yeah, but I struggle. I struggle with falling off. But like someone else said, that yes, but you give yourself some grace. You're human. But at the same time, do whatever is necessary to maintain the health that you want to have and the quality of life that you want to have, even in the longer term. If you can see down the road what the possibilities are and how it can work so much against you if you don't do those things, and then the burden it would place on others, family members and others who would then have to care for you. There are things that I know that I can do to help care for myself and not be in a position anytime soon, hopefully, where others would have to take care of me because there's some things I could have done and didn't do. So yeah, so that's how I would respond to that.
I love your answer. My husband has type 2 diabetes, and he's like a child, and he loves candy. And he hates the friggin' sensor because every time I put it on him, it's beeping. So we have this like truce, like he wears a part of the time and I bug him the other part, but he always puts candy in the shopping cart. It is unbelievable. So anyway, I understand as the wife of somebody with this, it is kind of nutty. So James, why don't you tell us your perspective?
Yeah, I think again, for me, one of the things I alluded to in the vignettes that we showed was exercise for me as an outlet. And a few years ago, I was out running in the morning. It was very early. It was dark. I stepped on a manhole cover that was raised. The street had sunk, and so it was raised. I rolled my foot and I broke it and snapped right in the middle of the street. I made it home, went to the doctor. I knew it was broke. It was swollen, purple, red, all different kinds of colors. But in my head, I kept thinking, what am I going to do now? Like, I know I'm not going to be able to run for a while. And sure enough, I was in a boot for probably maybe 8 to 9 months, close to a year, while it healed and the bones healed. And at first, it was extremely difficult because exercise has always been my method of maintaining my weight loss. And it's also been a stress reliever for me. And I just really did not know, well, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to handle this? And then I started to think more about it over time and realize that, you know, life is not a sprint. It's long term, right? It's not a quick thing. And so let's look at the long-term picture. And I decided, all right, I'm going to adjust my diet a little bit more because I'm not getting the calorie burn that I was. I looked at different exercises that were not as weight bearing on my foot. What could I do differently? And just tried to say, okay, here's a barrier. How do we pivot from this? And how do we still fulfill the need that we have as an individual, but not beat ourselves up about it? As Indigo said, give ourselves some grace, know that we are human, and that it's going to be okay at the end of the day, and work through it. And that's exactly what I did. And you know, my foot healed, and I'm back out running now. And it just, you know, it's one of those things in life that I think, ironically, in some way, shape, or form, I benefited from it in the long run from a mental perspective, because it taught me how to deal with a situation like that and how to overcome it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is having something that forces you to deviate. And then you have to get back or figure out a way through it. And you did. And that's, you know, why you continue to be successful. Now, I wish I could speak to you all forever, but we have to hear the clinicians. So I'm going to ask you to turn off your video and mute yourselves, and then we're going to hear from the clinicians, and then we're going to have you back. But thank you so much. And let's now go to the clinician panelists. All right. Wait, there, we've got everybody. Okay, so now we don't have a video of you guys, but I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself. So Ira, why don't you tell us about you?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, Ira Wilson. I'm actually a primary care physician. I practiced for years in Tufts Medical Center in Boston. For the last 15 years or so, I practiced at the VA in Providence, Rhode Island. And so that it's a general primary care practice. And I've also done a lot of academic and research things over the last 30 years.
Great. Angela?
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Heads. I'm a licensed psychologist and an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health in the McGovern Medical School at UT Health Houston. And I've been working in the behavioral health field just kind of in general for about 20 years, and shifted with a focus on addiction probably about 12 or 13 years ago. I regularly see clients in an outpatient psychiatry clinic and in an addiction research clinic that also provides HIV prevention services. And so we provide services to individuals who tend to be underrepresented in addiction treatment, including people who identify as members of racial, ethnic minority groups, members of sexual and gender minority groups, and people who are unhoused or unstably housed. And so we work to deliver therapy to people with substance use disorders and co-occurring mental health disorders. I'm also a researcher, and my research focuses on HIV prevention for women with substance use disorders or trauma-related mental health conditions.
Great. And John?
Sure. Thanks for having me today. My name is John Sevick. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been working in mental health for, 38 years. The last 33 plus years I've been at the VA in San Diego. For 27 years, I was working in the drug and alcohol field. I was a director of drug and alcohol services at the VA in San Diego. About 5 years ago, I made a change to move to a residential PTSD program for the most recent conflict veterans. Going back to the alcohol and drug population, most of them were, chronic conditions, struggle with homeless issues, food insecurities, co-occurring mental health disorders. And then in the PTSD, at risk for homelessness, complex traumas, childhood and adult combat trauma. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, that's wonderful. Welcome to you all, and I think you're all amazing. And I'm going to try to make us have a conversation that is interactive a bit, but I'm going to start with each of you answering this question. So I'm going to start in the order we just did it. So Ira, earlier in this panel, we heard comments from individuals with lived experience with chronic conditions. In your experience as a clinician, what are the most common barriers and challenges your patients and clients have had in maintaining health behaviors over time? So Ira, give it a shot.
Well, first of all, let me just congratulate all of the patients we just heard from for their sort of courage and their creativity and all of the sort of awesome messages we heard about how they've been able to do the things they've been able to do that that have helped them be healthy and vital to this and participate. I want to just make two quick reflections, and which then will lead directly into answering your question. One is how important it is for providers, but for me as a primary care provider, to demonstrate and to make sure patients understand that they have my unconditional acceptance and respect, regardless of how many times they fall off the wagon, regardless of what happens, and regardless of kind of the ups and downs that have to do with their disease. And that is one of the things I strive to do. The second thing I wanted to say, which I think relates to directly to the question, is that as a primary care doctor, I don't want to see people as a diabetic, a hypertensive, a person with HIV. I want to see them as a deeply rich, complicated, wonderful human being with sort of an infinite number of things that I can learn about them, who happens to have conditions that maybe I can help them with. But if and only if they feel like I'm on their side and they trust me. And so the reason I mention that is I think the most difficult thing for patients related to behavior change is life. That is to say, employment comes and goes, economic circumstances change. We have children who sometimes do well, but sometimes don't do so well. We have parents who get sick and age and die. We have friends with conflicts and difficulties in their lives. So the challenge is often not the disease itself, right? Because when you've had CF or diabetes or HIV for a long time, you get really good at it. In fact, you get very expert at it. But what you don't control is what goes on around you. And there were some examples of that, breaking your foot while running, etc. So to me, the challenge is supporting people through life as it happens, which is unpredictable and you can't control.
Well, I love that because I always start my visits with patients by asking them what's happening in their lives. And then I ask them what's happening medically in their lives, because with all of these chronic conditions, I agree entirely that it's the whole ball of someone's life that's impacting it. So I love that answer you gave. Angela, could you further elaborate? Because I'm pretty sure you have the same perspective, but what's your unique take?
Yes, some very similar perspectives, of course. I really enjoyed hearing from the people with lived experiences, and a lot of the things that I hear from my clients or patients aligned with their experiences. I think a big challenge, I think about things kind of like on an individual level and then the system level. I think a big challenge to health behavior change is probably the providers that people encounter. One of my first questions when I get a person in therapy is, have they been in therapy before, and what was that experience like? And I'll say that if a person has a bad first experience, it takes a long time for them to be willing to come back to get care again. And when they do, I'm so happy to see them and congratulate them on making that choice to get help for themselves. I think another challenge is just kind of the way that our society is set up is kind of this idea that people should be able to make these changes just based on willpower alone. And so when I think about people with a substance use disorder, there's a lot of judgment, a lot of stigma. Stigma has been mentioned today several times. And just this attitude that you should just be able to make the changes because you need to make the changes because we say you should be able to make those changes. So that whole thing, that whole idea that you should just be able to do it without help is definitely a barrier. So people will avoid entering into care if they don't feel like they have kind of the willpower to make those changes. And there's a lot more. Competition for resources, I think, has been mentioned in different ways today. If a person is struggling with having money to get food or having to work 2 or 3 jobs, then that's the healthcare behaviors might take a back seat to just taking care of those basic needs. And there's a lot more, but I'll stop there. We have plenty of time to talk.
Well, that was great. I loved your comments. And yes, when I started working years ago in East Los Angeles, I had to listen a lot because I didn't realize that many of those people had food insecurity, and talking about eating healthy food was something that just didn't resonate because they couldn't afford it. And so we did a lot of work to bring healthy food into the community, but a lot of our assumptions just fall out the window because it's not the way people live their lives. So John, you're last for this question.
Yeah, I don't, certainly a lot of similarities listening to the two of you. And I just want to give a shout out to the people with the lived experience. I think we're really here for them. Those are the people that are really kind of on the front lines, and we're just trying to be supportive of them in their struggles. And so probably the most difficult encounters, I think, for Dr. Heed's comments is that there's just a lot of life going on. And so that your kind of general kind of safety needs that people struggle with. And so if the clients don't know where they're living or sleeping the night before, don't have food to eat, those things seem to impact. I mean, from the work that I've been doing, I've been seeing patients on prior to coming in the residential program, I was seeing patients on an outpatient basis. And so though in transportation needs, if you can't get to the appointments, it really impacts my ability to kind of create change in their life. And then certainly when you're dealing with addiction, if people are relapsing, it's hard to talk to people that are, either in heavy withdrawal or under the influence. There are some studies that if people are in active withdrawal, there may be kind of pinpoint times that you can kind of create change in someone's life. So I guess to highlight, those trying to work on those basic needs that people have. Attendance issues is a big thing, and then ongoing substance use. When looking at my mental health population, there's just a struggle, I think, of facing their traumas that they've had. And so the avoidance of talking about their past traumatic experiences creates these kind of conflicts, and they miss their classes. They're feeling depressed, very anxious. And so ongoing mental health conditions get in the way. And if we try medications to assist with them, those are changes that typically don't happen within a few hours. They take sometimes a week to create change. And so ongoing mental health issues is really one of the big impacting things.
So it sort of fits into what you just said, because the next question is, in your personal experience as a clinician, what are some of the most common barriers and challenges that you've faced in trying to support your patients to maintain their health behaviors over time? So discuss 1 or 2 of the biggest challenges you can think of that face you as you try to help your patients do this successfully. So Ira?
Well, I think anyone who's seen a primary care doctor anytime recently understands that the biggest challenge from the provider side is time. But the second challenge is skill. And when I say skill, what I mean is skill related to behavior change. Physicians are trained in disease management. We know a lot about how to manage diseases. We don't know generally a lot about how to help people change behaviors. And even if you work really hard to train yourself or to become trained, fitting in behavior change management and in support of ongoing change, when you're fitting it into a 10, 15, 20-minute visit, is really challenging. And I find it a very interesting challenge because, you really can't change the environment. And people not only need behavior change management, they need to get mammograms and they need to get physical exams, they need to get EKGs, and we need to talk about mental health. So there are lots of things that we have to do in addition to managing behavior change as a specific thing, be it smoking, be it alcohol, be it medication taking, and integrating those things in a skillful way while doing all those other things that you're obligated to do is really quite difficult. And I find it a really fascinating challenge. But let me make one other comment. It can only work with a longitudinal relationship because you can't really do anything, right, in a 10 or 15 or 20-minute visit. But if you stack those over years and you add on kind of trust and collaboration, a lot is possible.
I love that. Those are great answers because thinking about it, one of the reasons it's so easy for me to see lots of patients in a clinic day is because I've known all those people for 25 years and it's like an ongoing dialogue. It's not like I have to get to know Mr. Smith. It's that I know Mr. Smith. So you heal and help in the context of knowing. But it also brings up the fact that we need teams. It can't just be you or me. I mean, I love a good primary care doctor. I'm in awe of you all because I couldn't know those many things. I can only know diabetes. But in my East LA clinic, the most important provider, the most important diabetes doctor is our social worker because she does all the things like transportation and help people to go to food banks and do all the pieces that I can't do as a provider. And it's amazingly useful. So I think that the team care is important, but a lot of us don't necessarily have that. On the West Side, I don't have that at all, which actually is a barrier. So Angela,
one quick
sure.
shout out to the VA. And John may say the same thing, but the VA is actually an extraordinary care system and it has tremendous substance abuse, behavioral health care resources. And so this is just another way of saying you're absolutely right. It's all about teams and being in a healthcare system that allows you access to the team members that you need is really essential.
I love that. All right, so Angela, your perspective.
Sure. So part of my answer was stolen. I was going to say that building that relationship, making sure that it's just not a one-time thing, and spending some time is really important. And so when I'm in settings where that's not possible, that can be very challenging, and I have to be happy with, or at least not happy, but accept that, like, sometimes planting a seed, if I only have one time or a brief time with a client, planting seeds for behavior change can be helpful. I just may not see the results of it. So that's sometimes challenging for me. I think also a lot of education has to go into the helping a person with behavior change. And that requires, additional time and patience on my part in figuring out where a person is, what kind of information that they already have, the accuracy of that information, and then building on that so that the clients can make the next step. Also, our healthcare system, I don't think, is really set up for prevention and health behavior maintenance. It's always about like putting out the fire when a person is really sick, then, all the resources are made available. And so that's a frustration on my part that, as far as prevention and maintaining health behavior change so a person can stay healthy, is not really well supported in what we have available as far as insurance and the healthcare system.
Yeah, broken access is a big problem because once you finally get someone doing well, and then they don't have access to healthcare, or your healthcare is just devastating, I think. So John, since you work in such an ideal environment, why don't you tell us your perspective?
Sure. Yeah. No. Ira, I super appreciate the shout out to the VA. It's really an amazing healthcare system. Not that there aren't things that can be better, but to have access to pretty much everything under one, either on one property. Some VAs are really large, with buildings all over the place. In San Diego, it's really one primary hospital with some outpatient clinics, but that you can get housing services, transportation services, medical care, mental health care. It's really incredible. And it's rare that any veteran loses those services. They just kind of have them their whole life. They're doing some new stuff now where someone may just get 5 years of services after they leave the service for some things. But, to Ira's point, it's incredible. They can come to this one place and just get all of their care needs taken for them. To Angela's point there, the prevention part of it is a concern that I wish there was more work done on that. I mean, I've worked with many parts of the medical part of the hospital in San Diego to try to have people take more care of their preventative kind of concerns. They try to do early intervention on people. Those things don't really seem to stick, or I've not seen them stick with people. I think the biggest struggles that I've seen are just the stigma attached to the addiction part of it. It seems that the emergency room department struggles with people with addictions. The medicine units struggle with people with addictions. And, something that Ira said early on is that I really try to meet patients where they're at from a non-judgmental perspective, and being sensitive to their life plight, whatever that is, and just try to work on what are their main goals. So trying to be on top of what the patient's looking to change in their life and listening to them.
Well, those are great insights. And now, because of time, I'm going to ask our other panelists, our person panelists, to return. So if you guys could turn back on your cameras and back on your mics, and we'll all join together. And I'm sure we'll get through only one question with all of us present, but that's okay, because it's hard to, I wish we're all in a room together, because it'd be nice to have an actual conversation, but that's okay, we'll survive. Now, so what we're going to discuss now is really how everybody's learned from each other, and how or what you would teach each other in order to improve things. So that's the whole goal of this meeting. So what we're going to do is to start with what points have you heard from the other panelists that resonate with you, and why? And again, I'm going to call on you to keep order. So I'm going to start with Chip. So Chip, I'm picking on you, but please start.
So I really liked what Dr. Wilson said about getting to know the patient and building, they call it longitudinal building. And I never thought about that, but I've realized that that's exactly what we do with CF care, where we have one doctor that we just see for many, many years. And so even though our visits may not be very long, there's a lot of trust there that I feel like I don't have to get to know him every time I go. Like, there's definite give and take based on previous conversations. And I think that probably more than anything else has been really important. But also having a team. As an example, for me personally, even though I have decent insurance through my work, I was still paying a lot more for my medication than I probably needed to. And my care team added a pharmacist that would just help you get the best deals and medications and take advantage of all the different discounts that are available. And he probably saved me $100 a year just by knowing what all the discounts are, what all the programs are. So I really think, having a team to help with each phase and each part of the disease, I can see that in my daily life, even with really good insurance. And I can see how if you don't have all the resources that good insurance will provide, you having a full set of team members that each knows how to get you access to every individual piece that you need would be very valuable. So I think the team-based approach is especially good for managing a long-term disease like we have.
So that's interesting and true. Cost is really a big factor, even in people who have good insurance, and there are people who often don't. So thank you for bringing that up. So Ira, because we're switching back and forth from clinician and patient or person with a chronic condition and back again. So Ira, if you could make some comments about what you've learned from the other panelists.
Sure. I could go on and on. Let me focus on just one thing though, because this has been really very, very rich. And I want to pick up what both Indigo and James have said about stigma. Most of my research has been on HIV and HIV medication adherence. And one of the most consistent messages across every neighborhood, every branch of society, every country in the world is that HIV is a wildly stigmatizing condition. Now, let me also say chronic depression, bipolar disease, addiction disorders, these are all very stigmatizing. I was interested that Indigo thought that cancer was less stigmatizing than it used to be. I think that's true as well, and that's really important. But it made me think about how hard we have to work with each other to get over the way in which stigma helps people from living full lives and even from treating their condition effectively. So I wanted to just sort of double down on that, well-known problem, but I really like how both of you brought that up.
Yes, it's a good point, and something sadly that we still live with a number of different chronic conditions. So Indigo, your turn. What have you learned from your other panelists?
Well, I want to talk a little bit more too about the team approach, because I think one thing that sometimes gets lost a bit is the importance of those community-based organizations that provide wraparound care for people. It certainly has been the case with HIV and other conditions. Those organizations that become the home really for people, and they provide give attention to some of the things that you don't really get or you shouldn't maybe expect from your medical providers. But for those medical providers to know about those resources and to encourage people to those resources. I've worked in one of those organizations for a number of years. And so those resources within the community that are there to provide that extra support and to become a part of a team to help ensure, the person's health and longer life. I mean, they really are essential to people. I mean, people who they'll accompany you to your doctor. They make sure you go and, provide your mental health and for your mental health. Some of the things I guess you can get at the VA, you do have resources in the community that can provide that and do provide that. And, and I know they fight for resources to do it, but it's been really critical to a lot of people's lives.
You're absolutely correct. And I think it's just fascinating to learn everybody's perspective on what they've learned from each other. So Angela, what do you have to add?
Sure. I've learned so much today. I was particularly struck by Indigo's statement about hitting the reset button. And a lot of the work, especially, all health behavior, but I work with addiction quite a bit, and kind of part of the process of recovery is that return to use sometimes, and then getting back in there. I have this picture that I often show people about recovery, and it shows a mountain. People can who are lucky or are very skilled can kind of go straight up one way and achieve what they want to achieve. But for most people, there are places where you make some progress and then you dip down a little bit and you make progress again. And the end result is the same. You reach the goal, but there are so many points of reset that occur in any health behavior change. And so that whole idea of hitting the reset button speaks to self-compassion, having that acceptance that you're working towards something and you'll get there eventually. And sometimes you might, I don't want to say fail, but a lot of people think of it as a failure, but sometimes you take little dips in your progress. And so I loved hearing that today. And also I heard a lot about social support. And I believe it was Drew who talked about how much his spouse helps with his healthcare. And so just wanted to highlight that as well. So that self-compassion and acceptance of the social support are so important.
Great. I like the mountain. I'm a hiker, backpacker, so it resonates with me. But as another conversation that I'd love to have at some point is the hardest thing for me is to help people find that self-compassion and self-love. They're just people who just beat themselves up always because of their childhood, because of whatever their lived experiences have been. And I don't know how to get people to feel that so that they can take care of themselves. And so that's, one of the reasons we obviously need a whole team, because I'm not the best at that. But Angela, you sound wonderful. And, I think it'd be great to have people around that can offer that perspective. So, James, you're next.
Yeah, I had an idea of what I wanted to say, but after hearing from everybody again, I feel like I kept changing my mind over and over and over. And I think, I've dedicated my entire career to patient advocacy. I started out in kidney disease and now work in the field of obesity for the OAC. And I'm personally affected by obesity, which is why I'm here today. And I think so often we hear from people that, treatments, they failed the treatment, but in reality, the treatment failed them. And we hear about this broken system, broken healthcare system, and our system is broken to a point, but the people in it are not, right? So the providers that are here today, us as patients, we are not broken. And I think it's important, there were things that Dr. Wilson said and Dr. Heads has said specifically around, the provider's only going to have 10 to 15 minutes, but it's those appointments that are stacked that will make a difference in the end. Or the question of, have you engaged in mental health therapy or counseling before? And how did that go? How did you feel about it? I think what's so difficult with this, though, and in this audience and this panel and many of the healthcare providers I work with, is that you're really talking to the best of the best when it comes to this. And unfortunately, we know that people struggle when it comes to trying to address their disease, and not all providers are perfect at it and as good as the folks on this panel today. And so I would just encourage folks that you got to find your people. The OAC is a coalition of people impacted by obesity. We're a nonprofit like many other nonprofits that exist in different areas: cancer, HIV, hypertension, diabetes, so on and so forth. And I really do think that I keep seeing in the word cloud below us on the slide deck, the word social support is just dominating it. And I really do think that's what it's going to take. There's no one person or one thing that I think is going to change for someone. It's going to be that wraparound approach, the healthcare team, and then beyond the healthcare team, yourself, your spouse, your family, your loved ones, your friends, and really finding your people, because that's where I think we learn best.
Great. And it made me think that what I tell people, which is true, is that it's not one size fits all. So I may not be the best doctor for you, but I may be the next doctor for this other person. And I feel like encouraging patients to find the providers that fit them is really important. And it's not about my ego, but I know who I am as a provider, which again, may not be a style that you as a person with a chronic condition might like. So I think that idea of connection, but finding the right connection, is really there as well. So John, the last answer to this question.
Sure. Gosh, a lot's been said with the five previous people before me. It's that I think the things that stand out, two main things, and it's because of the populations I've worked with, their lives has really been in disarray because of their addictions and their mental health conditions. Is establishing some type of routine in their recovery plan, and it's been mentioned today by I think all three of the lived experience individuals, and that trying to develop a different kind of life for yourself. And certainly if we assume the safety needs are taken care of first, and then what is my life going to look like? And for the patients that I've worked with, is that they've been living a different kind of life for decades. And so just to expect that change is going to happen because I stopped drinking or I started medications for my PTSD or depression is just not realistic. And so I do a lot of work in dialectical behavioral therapy. And so this idea that people are doing the best they can, and to Angela's comments as they're walking up the mountain, just because I'm doing the best I can doesn't mean it's going to come up with a good answer every single time. Sometimes I'm going to stumble and I have to find a way to get up and use my support system, whether that's healthcare providers or, as James commented, these other kind of people that are now in my life, and trying to show grace for myself and understand that I'm doing the best I can, and be compassionate, and that I'm going to try to do better next time. And so I think the two things that are standing out to me is trying to establish a routine, and then being able to have grace for yourself as you continue through your life of recovery.
Sorry, my dogs have all started barking in unison. So now I'm going to go backward. Sorry about this, John, because I want to get one last question answered, but I'm going to let you start with the answer to this question. So we have been considering different health conditions: obesity, diabetes, HIV, cystic fibrosis, as well as different health behaviors like taking medicines, exercising, eating well, and monitoring glucose. When we look across these different health conditions and behaviors, what barriers to health behavior maintenance seem to be common across conditions? And what are barriers feel different across conditions or behaviors? So, John, if you could give us your thoughts.
Sure. With the patient populations that I've worked with, some of this is similar stuff that I've talked about. It's the having to establish a routine regarding making their mental health and addiction appointments. Is that if patients are not coming in on a regular basis, I mean, I have the luxury, I think, of seeing patients, currently I work in a 6-month residential treatment program. And so they're here, they're a captive audience. I think when I worked more in addiction, that was more of the struggle, because some of those basic safety needs are not taken care of. And so if you're not able to take care of the food insecurities and housing, it's really hard to make any inroads in those other kinds of things. And so you have to try to make those kind of initial steps first to make sure that the patient is feeling safe, and then moving forward from there.
Great. All right, James, your turn.
Yeah, I think we've covered so much of it, and I still go back to the stigma part of it. I think the stigma is really, really prevalent when it comes to specific diseases. And again, speaking to obesity specifically, unfortunately, healthcare is one of the areas that people with obesity experience weight bias and stigma the most. And so, we're talking about being, if you want to address your weight and health, going in and talking to a medical provider, that should be a safe place, a place where you could be vulnerable, you could have those conversations. However, we know people deal with stigma in all facets of a medical appointment, from the moment they walk in the door till the moment that they're talking to a provider. Things like people first language, using the word obesity instead of obese, don't label someone, their disease, and just key things like that I think can really make the most of those 15 minutes. And so I really think that stigma just is such a huge barrier for us as a society in all facets of all the diseases we've covered today. But I have to say, in obesity, weight bias and stigma are really something that we still struggle with.
Yes, sadly, it is true. So, Angela?
I think we're all coming to pretty much the same place. I think across all conditions, stigma is huge. And I guess on the other side of that, as providers, we have to do quite a bit of work to gain the trust of our patients, if we are expecting them to hear us and be able to feel that they're able to make changes, kind of outside of all of the judgment that they experience in other places. So I think that the responsibility falls to the provider to make sure that they create a safe place for all of the patients to be able to make those changes for themselves.
That makes sense, and it makes me think about how much providers have to do in terms of prior authorizations, charting, portal time, and everything else, that I kind of feel like the system of medicine is crushing out those elements that all of us are discussing are important. And I think we need to work really hard to make sure that we maintain what is important about being a healthcare provider in terms of connecting with the people who need us. So Indigo, your thoughts?
Oh, so many. Yeah, not needed. Yeah, so many thoughts. But one I'll focus in on, because it seems like at the beginning and end of the day, it falls on we as individuals to try and figure out what we need and how to get resources to help us. There are people who can help us with that, but at the end of the day, it seems like it comes back to us to figure that out. And in doing that, I really think that we all have to remind ourselves of what we've been through before. What are our strengths? What are our gifts, our assets? Oftentimes, if we start with what our problems are, they will become so overwhelming and immobilizing. But if we start with what we do well and what we've done, to remind us that we have made some strides in our lives and that we can do it again. That's some of the work that we've done, certainly with women, and hearing their stories, letting them see their stories, documenting their stories, so they can see that they on a daily basis what we have done. So that you can be better prepared, to go and to meet, the world that you need to meet to help you even more. But it just, we all were born with something, and we have it. And I think keep tapping into that, remembering, our parents and what they might have gone through, and others in our lives around us, have all certainly been very helpful to me to remember that I can do it. I mean, I've done it in some different ways, and maybe it's going to get more difficult. Managing my healthcare is becoming more difficult because of the range of complications. And, everything is not in one place. All the records may not be in one place. And so I found that even I have to help the providers by bringing to them the information that I got from other places, and carrying around with me a cheat sheet that just has all of my history summarized, so that, I can try to be consistent when we go over our history and all that. But there are things that I find that I'm having to do to even help the provider to help me. So, just being conscious of those things have been, are just my present situation, and I think it will be for some time to come.
Well, we providers appreciate the help, trust me. So Ira, your comments.
Well, I just want to reflect on if all of the listeners kind of reflect back on what Chip, Indigo, and James have said about their stories. One of the most impressive things is how engaged they are. And it's not, engagement is one way of putting it, but it's high intelligence. It's an amazing level of problem solving, curiosity about what's going on, and this sort of profound level of taking responsibility for their own outcomes. And I just want to call all the three of them out for amazingly different, but really special stories of courage and bravery and commitment and engagement. On the provider side, we always have to be thinking about how is it that we trigger that, right? And how do we take advantage of it? How do we encourage it? And how do we support it? Because wow, you just heard a master class from the three of them about sort of how to be the most effective person with a chronic condition possible, and to initiate and maintain behavior change.
Yes, I want to clone them all and give whatever this thing is that they have to the people who are struggling so much, because you all are amazing. And it's true. But Chip, you got to have the last word in terms of the answer to this question.
I feel like I need to repeat what Dr. Wilson and Indigo have said, that it's really a matter of you have to take ownership of your desire to stay healthy. You providers can give us resources and knowledge, but if as a patient we just don't want to use them, I don't see any way you're going to convince us to use them or make us. You can't make us use them. I mean, we really have to want to affect our health outcome and do the things that we need to do to get us to maintain our health. I just think you guys are our cheerleaders maybe, but the patients that are going to really thrive are going to be the ones that say, I want to thrive and I want to keep trying to thrive, and give me what I need to thrive. But I think there has to be, probably the best thing you do for patients is to convince them that they have to take ownership of their health, and they can't just be passive consumers. That to really get ahead, they need to say, I want this and I'm going to do everything I can to make it happen. And I don't know how you do that. I mean, that's what you're trying to figure out too, but that's what I feel like, the three of us have done, is saying, I want to be healthy and I want to do everything possible to be healthy, and that we're not just passive consumers of the medical health system, we're active consumers. And that's what we need to be to maintain this outlook.
Well, that's good advice, and I think it's really important. So now we have one last thing to do, which is to react to this cloud thing. And I'll let you all just make comments without my calling on you. But I'm supposed to say, what do I see first off? And social support obviously is the biggest one. And then of course I wonder, as a clinician, how do I help that occur? Because in a way that's sort of separate from me, but clearly critical to this. And then routine. But I really like the comment that says adding playful activities. That's really sweet, because I think that is part of this, is having some joy in all of the world of whatever people are doing, because life has to be full of at least some playful activities. So if you could just make a few comments, just if you could, you can speak, I guess, and see what you think in response to this, because we've only got 4 more minutes.
I'm just going to jump in really quickly to say social support requires that we overcome enough stigma to be able to share our conditions, to give and receive and be engaged in social support. So it's just an interesting tension. That was the only comment I had quickly.
I like that.
Yeah, I would echo what Dr. Wilson said, and I think I would add in the self-compassion, and just again recognizing that we're human. We're gonna go up, we're gonna go down. Life is gonna be that journey, and so just having self-compassion, I think, is incredibly important.
On that same part, I'll jump in. The other word that kind of I'm identifying is resilience. So having that part of you that can bounce back, because you're not going to have a good day every day with whatever the health condition is, and being able to be accepting that I have this thing going on with me, and when it's a tough day, acknowledging that to myself. And there was something that Indigo talked about, that she gets these kind of food cravings that go on for a week or so at a time, and kind of acknowledge that these things are going to happen, but I'm going to get back on that treadmill and kind of go in the direction I want to go.
What I want to say about social support is that it's a two-way thing. The beauty about social support is that there's that other person or persons who want you here, who want you well, who want to support you. And, in some ways you then have some kind of an accountability kind of relationship. It's not, one where you want to do well and live well because you want that other person to also have you. I mean, in my case, my daughter, for example, it was very important that I show her that I'm going to fight for my life, and get her support so that I can also support her growth and development. So the social support is really a two-way thing.
Now, related to that, I'm seeing power relationships there in the middle. And we've been talking about, when we talk about social support, it's kind of that positive power relationships. And unfortunately, there are some relationships that can take health, behavior change and maintenance in the direction that we don't want to. So it's really important to for people to surround themselves with supportive others.
I see routine's a big component. I think that's very important. But also I like that, I'm sorry, let me see. Self-compassion was also up there. And I think recognizing that we can always do more if we have more time and more resources and whatever, but we can't berate ourselves for failing. We have to be willing to accept the failure or lack of ability to move forward. And I like the self-compassion made it so high up on people's cloud and things they noticed or felt that they were trying to say.
Well, that takes us to the end of our time as panelists. And I just want to thank you all so much for sharing. I've learned a lot, and I wish I could keep this conversation going forever, because I think it's so nice to learn from each other. In an odd way, it's a kind of social support because we're all doing similar things, although in dissimilar conditions. But after this, we are now going to turn back to the NIH being in charge. And I want to pass this back to Sydney, who's going to take us to where we belong. But again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your participation and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to all of our incredible panelists. That was a really fantastic and insightful session. So thank you for your time and for joining us today. We'll now be moving to a short break, but before we start the break, we'd like to propose the next poll question, which asks each of you in the audience to reflect on your own experience. So the next question is, what has helped you in your own personal experience with health behavior maintenance? You can feel free to submit your response either before, during, or right after you come back from a short break, and we'll take a look at your responses when we return. So we will be reconvening in about 15 minutes at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time for the second panel session. So again, this is the current poll question. We'll also paste it in the chat so you can access it at your leisure. And we will reconvene at 1:15 Eastern. Thank you.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. Deborah Young-Hyman from OBSSR. And I guess the first thing I want to say is just wow. What a first session. Just so many insights and such fabulous and insightful sharing. So the first thing we're going to do before we launch into the program for our session 2 this afternoon is look at the word cloud you all have been filling out, which is about your own personal experiences. We have, whoop, I can't see the number. It looks like 60. Oh, it's changing. Ha, love it. Some interesting differences already. I'm a dog person, so I immediately saw my dog. And fun sounds like joyful events from before. I want to let you all know that all of these word clouds will be incorporated into the meeting summary that will be available to everybody, and I'll talk more about that at the very end. One of the things I also just want to just been muted. I am muted. Alt A. Am I muted?
No, we can hear you now, Deborah.
Oh,
You're good.
great. Thank you. Always little glitches. You know, one of the things I just want to note is that the words on this word cloud are just a common language that we all think about how we get through our day and how we conduct our behavior as part of daily living. And in fact, the center theme of this entire workshop has been lived experience, starting with individuals to providers, care providers, clinicians. And this afternoon session, we are going to segue into how evidence-based behavior maintenance programs have been adapted into real life, real lived experiences. We're going to have three presenters today. Our first is Dr. David Marrero, who is going to talk to us about approaches to adaptation of the diabetes prevention program into various WISE settings. And he's going to talk in particular about a very systematic process that has enabled both adapting the DPP process and also its sustainment in community settings, or WISE settings, I should say. Our next speaker, Dr. Karen Angersol, will present the scale-up of an evidence-based digital support program to connect patients with care resources provided in HIV clinic settings, with the goal of sustaining health behaviors and health outcomes, health status. And then our last presentation will be by Jen and Marissa, who are part of a team led by Elva Arendado, and they will talk to us about multi-level interventions of a culturally adapted intervention, multi-level intervention, adapted to promote and sustain physical activity in Latinas in church settings. And I want to introduce Dr. Maureen Monahan Center, who is at NIDDK, who will moderate this session. And I thank you all. Okay, let's start with David's
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Deborah, for the introduction. We are really delighted to welcome our three presenters this afternoon. We do plan to have ample time for question and answer and discussion at the end of the three presentations. And so I do encourage, as you have questions that are coming up and listening to the presentations, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, which you will see on the bottom. That will allow us to keep track of the questions so we can raise those in our discussion period. And we are delighted to kick off this session with Dr. David Marrero. So Dr. Marrero, I invite you to share your screen and get us started.
Thank you. Let's see here. Okay, are we up?
We are up. It looks great.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I was an investigator with the Diabetes Prevention Program, one of the principal investigators at the Indiana site, and one of the two behavioral scientists that were actually part of the group of investigators that developed this study. And at the end of the trial, which was wildly successful, I was asked, because I was a behavioralist, to come up with a plan to translate this into the broader public health. And so I'm going to talk about some of the lessons that I've learned from doing that, and hopefully get some insight from all of you in our discussion time. Okay. There's some key elements that, as I attempted to move this into the broader public health and into the communities, I think are very important. And the first one, of course, is you have to use a curriculum that's both evidence-based and adapted to be responsive to a variety of contextual factors. The second part of that statement is the most important to me. You have to look at participant economic status. You have to look at participant cultural norms, mores, and health beliefs. And you have to look at ecological and environmental factors. Well, even though the DPP was a wildly effective intervention to reduce the onset of type 2 diabetes, it wasn't a one-size-fits-all intervention. And if you try to take a model and adapt it, not adapt it to every type of community that you'll encounter that needs to have that service, you're going to have a lot of problems. So this slide shows some of the issues that you have to start considering when you go forward and start placing something into a broader context in a clinical setting. There are some strategies, I think, to address these factors. First, I think it's really important that we assess community receptivity to the proposed intervention. Just because we build something doesn't mean that everybody wants to use it, or they'll find it to be something that is important to them and their lived experience. So the questions I always ask is, does the target audience see the intervention as necessary? We all assume that everybody wants to have diabetes prevention, but in fact, it turns out that in some communities, it just wasn't viewed as an important issue in their life. Can the target audience afford to participate? And that's the issue in terms of affording time and affording money. Where I work in the American Southwest, there's a tremendous set of barriers that deal with multiple job issues and a lack of fiscal resources that are important when you're going to ask people to make lifestyle modifications. We also have to ask, is the suggested approach culturally sensitive? Is it responsive to the different types of populations that we're going to be targeting? And is there a suitable location? Surprisingly, when the DPP was done, it was held at medical centers all across the United States, but that's not where people want to usually go for a lifestyle intervention. So you have to find a place that is both adaptable to the demands of the intervention, but also seen by the community as a safe, solid, respected place to place this type of program into. And is there an existing or feasible mechanism to recruit? So even though we can place something into a community, it doesn't mean that we can reach the people that we really want to reach and get them to come to this event. And finally, is there a culturally appropriate method to assess effectiveness and encourage sustainability? And I'll come to all these points in this talk. I think it's really important that we conduct environmental scans. And by those, I mean a method of assessing key stakeholders who have social influence in the target community. This is a qualitative effort that has to be done using qualitative methods. And I argue for adopting a community participatory research approach. We are trying to bring something to communities that have their own mores, their own norms, their own opportunities, their own sense of barriers and facilitators. They have different types of growth and survival issues. So you have to really assess what the community is willing to engage in and what they're ready to adopt. And then you also not only have to assess community members, but you have to assess support membership as well. And by that, I mean agencies and systems that are going to support the things you're asking people to do. And if this will, well, it doesn't want to go forward. There we go. So usually a very solid approach when you're trying to do a lifestyle intervention is to assemble a community advisory board. This is a group of people who you've identified through your environmental scan as having representation of target communities, and you want to discuss the intervention approach with them to assess social and cultural barriers and facilitators. You may think you know what will be a barrier, but you can be really surprised sometimes by what people will tell you. As an example, there is in Indianapolis, where I've done most of this research, there is a race called the Indianapolis 500. And if you're trying to do anything in May, you're going to have some issues. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of people involved with the race, and it's just not a good time. But if you didn't know that and you came to this community without awareness of the integration of the Indy 500 into the culture of Indianapolis, you would have a barrier that you didn't anticipate. You need from your community advisory board to solicit and, when possible, integrate appropriate changes. They will guide you in telling you what's going to help you get this done and what's going to interfere with getting it done. So that means you have to discuss strategies for recruitment. We always think that we can do recruitment the same way across the board. And in fact, my experience is that each community is in fact different, has different approaches they're going to work. Some are responsive to print media, others are responsive to radios. Some are responsive to participation in community situations or settings, churches and things like that. You need to also discuss strategies for implementing evaluation measures. It's one thing to put the intervention into play, but if we're doing research, getting people to come back repeatedly for measurement and assessment becomes a different problem and a different issue that you need to explore with your community advisory board to come up with the best set of strategies. Finally, you need to ensure that the results are shared with participants in the broader community. Way too often we do things in a research framework and we don't share the results with people that we've actually been doing it with. And I think that that's a mistake. I also think it's really important that when you share things with the community and you work with your advisory board to figure out a best method for distribution, you enrich the potential for future interventions and future activities within that community. Now, the diabetes prevention program, we figured out a way to translate it into the community by using the YMCA as a model for delivery. The DPP was a very successful study, and it was designed as an extremely well-funded efficacy trial and not a public health program. We had a huge budget, a lot of opportunity to encourage people to achieve a goal that we set for weight loss and physical activity. And it's not feasible to implement in a broad, to do a program like this as a public health initiative in strictly medical centers with expensive staffing and well-trained people. You'll find that you'll bust the bank with blinding speed. So many persons are not receptive to going to medical centers, and we learned that as we tried to start moving it around the country. We also knew that locations in medical centers are not always convenient, and surprisingly, many had poor relationships with medical centers, and this is oftentimes the case with disadvantaged and minority populations that have not received good social and personal treatment at medical centers. So we decided to go to the YMCA. We wanted to locate the DPP intervention in locally recognized, convenient, and accepted community sites. Now, people have always asked me why the why. Well, there were some good things that made it a good public health model to me. First, they use lower cost lay group leaders. They're not going to use highly trained and expensive personnel to deliver this program. The YMCA is based in a community and they get community members to do the implementation of programs like this, assuming that you have a training program that will work for that. They also operate to achieve cost recovery only. The YMCA is unique amongst community agencies in that they will work with every client that comes through the door for anything at the Y to adapt it to meet their economic capacity. So if they can't afford the full price of something, they're going to adapt a schedule or a payment structure that's going to work for them. And in fact, they have a policy, a national policy, to turn no person away for the inability to pay for a program. That's not well known, but the Y is in fact always had this unique aspect that they will let you come and play for free if in fact you have no other way to afford what they're trying to offer. And as a public health initiative, this was very attractive to me because let's face it, many of the people that have pre-diabetes and had it at the time that the study was over were in fact low income and minority and disadvantaged populations. Finally, they had past experience with national program scaling. The YMCA is a place that has done national programs on asthma and CPR. And many of us have learned these things at a Y. I learned how to do CPR at a YMCA. And that, all these elements together made this a good community partner. But there was one other thing that was important, and that's that the availability in community penetration of the YMCA was quite large. At the time that we did the study to test this model of could we do this in the YMCA, there were 2,700 YMCA facilities, are shown in this map. And they have probably 3 times the number of satellite programs that are conducted outside of the physical YMCA, but in fact are YMCA-based programs. It turns out that 57% of US households are located within 3 miles of a YMCA. So when you look at the factors that they use low-cost personnel, they have a public health mentality of trying to adjust costs and tailor it to the needs of their constituencies, and they have an enormous penetration and recognition, and they are not usually viewed in almost all communities as a gang territory or something that would, in fact, become a barrier to getting participation. It became a very nice model. Now, how did we adapt it? Well, it turns out that the YMCA's are run like franchises. It's not a national program with standardized national procedures. There are some, but each has its own unique Y culture. They have different rules, different programs, and different populations that they serve. So each Y has adapted itself and modified itself to be responsive to the communities in which they're integrated. So we did an environmental scan in each target community, and our initial study of the Y was done in Indianapolis, but we quickly branched it out. And the first set of studies that we did were in 11 states across the United States. And in each place we did an environmental scan to figure out what the target community was about, who had influence, who didn't, what were the things that they thought would be barriers, and what were the things that they thought would be facilitators. That allowed us to get the receptivity of the community assessed, and that varied quite a bit by socioeconomic status, race, and ethnicity. For example, whites, Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians each had a slightly different view of what would be the best way to do it, what would be the importance of doing it, and what they were willing to do to participate within it. Okay, that meant that we had different demands for recruitment at each location. So if we were in Arizona, or if we were in New York, or if we were in Florida, or if we were in Georgia, each of those places had a different Y feel, a different Y set of barriers and facilitators, a different issue about the community that was the dominant community that used the YMCA as a facility, or was even willing to go there, okay? And we also then realized that that meant that the curriculum that was the DPP intervention had to be tailored at each site. It had to be tweaked a little bit. So we couldn't use the same food examples that we used in the curriculum to do one in a Hispanic community versus a white community. They just have a different cultural understanding of food, the importance of food, and how it works within their social context. So in each place, we made adaptations. Now, let's talk about fidelity, because this is important. While I say it's important to tweak and modify the programs to fit the community, it's also important that the programs that we do present, in fact, embrace the fundamental constructs of the original intervention. So that's so important, because we have to be able to justify the results. If we kept doing a completely different curriculum in every city that we touched, it wouldn't be the DPP curriculum anymore, and we wouldn't be sure that it would work as effectively as it did in the DPP study, which was a clinically based, evidence-based program. So if you want to replicate or compare your programs, you really need to have some core element, some unique core element that is in fact the same across the board, with a clear understanding of what it is that you modified and how you tweak things so they could in fact be reflective of the DPP curriculum, but adapted to the communities. So it's important that we can measure and enhance program quality, but we have to keep fidelity to the original construct. And in this case, in the DPP, it was not providing people with a specific diet. It was teaching them a different way to think about food, to approach their eating habits, and trying to make compensation for the amount of daily calories that was coming from sources of fat. We also have to assess fidelity and measurement outcomes, and this always proves to be a barrier. It was a barrier at each and every YMCA facility that we touched. By the time we were done with the first round of Ys, we had about 40 YMCAs in 12 states doing this program for us. So we developed a standardized training protocol for the coaches. We realized that one way to get fidelity is to make sure that all the people who are implementing the program, and these are all community folks, these are not highly trained people, registered dietitians and psychologists and that kind of thing. We had to make sure that they delivered a standardized approach to this with the modifications that were reflective of the uniqueness of their constituencies. So we also used community advisory boards to modify curriculum within fidelity boundaries. So for example, as I said earlier, foods used were a big deal, and the importance of social and cultural events and eating behavior was also a big deal. There are some things in some cultures where food is the central part of the social fabric. You can't disrupt that, but we can show them how to do it in a way that was consistent with the original intention of the DPP, which is a calorie regulated and fat calorie source issue regulation. We also had to conduct process evaluations to make sure that, in fact, the people implementing the program were doing it in a way that we wanted them to do that kept fidelity to the original curriculum content. And surprisingly, when you put community members into a coaching role, sometimes they take off. They have a different view about what should be taught or what should be suggested to the clients as to how they should eat or how they should do some things. So we did a lot of process evaluations and had people doing observations to make sure that, in fact, they followed a curriculum that we developed, then tweaked and modified and got community input on. So it was reflective of their communities, but in fact, still was the DPP curricula at its intent. Now, sustainability is always an issue when you're doing lifestyle intervention. And it's always an issue when you're trying to get something that can be done repeatedly and over a long period of time. So we used the Community Advisory Board again to assess facilitators and barriers to long-term participation. And this usually dealt with things like scheduling issues, both work and school. Different places have different issues that come up in terms of school events and what's going on with the school system. And if you're asking somebody to attend every Wednesday and Wednesday night becomes a football, event or something like that, you have a problem. So you always have to look through what are the things that will keep people coming back week after week, month after month, which is required by the program. We also knew that there were environmental factors. Now, where I live in Arizona, in the summertime, it gets to 115, 117 degrees outside, and asking people to show up during the daytime, for example, at a program, even if it's at the YMCA, is very difficult. So a lot of times you have to start moving the programs to the nighttime implementation. We also knew that there were seasonal and unique events. I told you about the Indianapolis 500. I guarantee you in every Y community, there's something unique to that community, to that state, to that city, which is really important. And it's going to interfere with participation if you don't account for it and upfront schedule with that in mind. Finally, you always have to consider economic factors. In some programs, that we've implemented, one of the problems we were facing time after time was that people had multiple jobs to make their economic situation workable for them. And if you know that up front, you can do creative scheduling to work around some of those barriers. If you don't, people will just start dropping off, and then you don't have sustainability. Finally, you have to develop a method to deal with missed sessions and re-engagement. One of the unique problems of the DPP curriculum is it's a sequential curricula. Each session builds onto the next session. And if you miss one or two sessions, when you come back into the group, and it's a group program, you discover that, in fact, you've missed some content, you've missed some things, and many people felt that that was a real barrier to them, and they would drop out. They felt like, well, I can't do this anymore because I missed a session because of an event, a sickness, a school issue, whatever it might be. So we had to start being really creative with how we can get sessions to be made up in a way that was copacetic with the individual. Sometimes it was a one-on-one with the coach. Sometimes it was sending them some printed material that they could look at and review. But if you don't think about that, you're going to lose a percentage of your population that perceives that they have let you down, or they have let themselves down, or they've missed too much and they can't come back. So it's really important to consider how to deal with missed sessions and re-engagement. And that, again, is something that you're going to have to work with within each community to do it in whatever works best for that particular group. Now, it's one thing to develop the intervention. It's another thing to then implement evaluation measures. And usually when we're doing research, that means we've asked people to come back and let us do things to them, draw samples from them, collect information, pen and paper, surveys to get on a scale and be weighed, whatever it might be. And we've always found that addressing social stigma, which came up earlier in today's workshop, was a major thing, because that was a gigantic contributor to missed meetings and dropouts. You got to remember in the DPP, almost everybody was significantly overweight or obese. And the fact was that a primary outcome in the study and for evaluating the effectiveness of the public health version of it is to weigh people. Well, guess what? Hardly anybody likes to get in a scale in front of anybody else and get weighed. And while that was tried, quickly was dropped, and we had to come up with a model that allowed each person to have an individual and private weighing session to get their weight. It's a small thing, but enormously important. And that varies quite a bit from culture to culture. African American versus Hispanic versus white, very different reactions to not only weight and physical size, but also social stigma. So something that you really have to consider and pay very, very careful attention to. We also found that it's really important to have very careful explanation to participants as to why we're doing this. What is it that we want to get from the information that we're collecting? If they just see it as we're treating them like guinea pigs, they're not as motivated to show up. They'll come to the program, but they won't come for the evaluations and figuring out whether there's an effective outcome to the way we're doing the program in their community. So you really have to be carefully, you have to carefully explain this to each participant, give them very clear information about why we're doing this, why it's important, and what their contribution will mean to the future. And most people, when you do that, are much more receptive to it. We also had to ensure participant capacity. And by that, I mean, for example, literacy. In the DPP study, we had a ton of surveys and pen and paper measures and stuff. When you get out into the broader community, and particularly when you start dealing and targeting with lower SES populations and things like that, you start dealing with things like literacy. There are a lot of people out there that really want to do the program and see the importance of it, but they're intimidated by filling out pen and paper measures. We could come up with a lot of different ways to do that. A lot of it had to do with verbal, telephone interviews, that kind of thing, but that was really, really important. We also had to make sure that they understood the assessment or the measurement tools we were using. Sometimes people look at this and say, why are you measuring this? I don't know why you want this. What is this about? So you have to explain to them, and very carefully again, this is why we want to know this information. We don't want to cause harm to anybody. And sometimes what we learn is when we do lifestyle interventions, they have an unanticipated consequence in a person's life. And we need to know that. We need to assess that so we can come up with a method that's going to help reduce that problem. Finally, scheduling and location are critical for follow-up measurements. And a lot of times you think that they will come back on the Wednesdays that you were holding the program or whatever day of the week it was in the time, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was convenient for them. And now that they're not doing a longer session or they're just doing an evaluation, they don't see the importance of having to get the babysitter, having to get the car that 3 people are going to try to use for a job that day, that kind of thing. So scheduling and location become really critical issues. And a lot of times we found that we were doing the program in one spot, but we were doing the assessments and the follow-up measures in different locations altogether, usually community places like churches, for example. So those are lessons that I learned trying to put the DPP into the broader public health, the things that were important to attend to make sure that the program worked. I'm happy to report that the YMCA turned it into a national program. We came up with a standardized approach for teaching people and the modification and the environmental screening. It's now being offered at almost 2,500 YMCAs across the country. And with that, I'll wait for questions until we're done at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Marrero. That was great. Yes, as our attendees have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I know we already have 1 or 2 there, and so we will follow up with those at the end of the session. And now I would like to switch over to Dr. Karen Ingersoll, who is joining us from the University of Virginia to share her information about supporting people with HIV via a theory-based mHealth platform. Dr. Ingersoll, would you like me to share your slides?
Yes, please. And if you put it into slideshow view. Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking about long-term maintenance of behavior through the lens of HIV care. And I'll be talking about a theory-based mobile app platform called Positive Links. You can go to the next slide, please. So in case you're not familiar with HIV care, I'll just tell you a few facts about it. Nowadays, people can live a long, healthy life living with HIV if they maintain care and medication. And typically, most people need to come to meet with their clinician at least twice a year. And this is really for the rest of their lives. So we're talking about the very definition of long-term behavior maintenance. If they do this, they can maintain viral suppression, meaning that the HIV virus isn't hurting their body too much and they can't transmit it to others. And it really does require many, many years of this good behavior of maintaining care. But inadequate retention in HIV care is very common and needs to be improved. And really where we'll succeed with HIV care for the population as a whole is if 95% of people who have HIV know it, if 95% of those remain in care for a lifetime, and if 95% of those in care achieve viral suppression. Let's go to the next slide. So our context in the state of Virginia, you can see a little star there in northern central Virginia where Charlottesville is located. We have a very dispersed population who are living with HIV in the state of Virginia. And that means that a lot of people have a long distance to travel for care. Sometimes this is very unaffordable and difficult. I can definitely resonate with the previous speaker about needing to tailor interventions for these challenges. And a lot of the people we serve in our own clinic at the University of Virginia come from more rural, isolated areas with a lot of poverty and poor transportation infrastructure, and where they fear disclosure of their HIV status because they feel like they would be shunned from their community. We also found, starting more than a decade ago when we first started working on some text messaging, that a lot of people had limited access to a good internet or cellular signal or to the high quality phones. So we had a lot of challenges to overcome to develop an mHealth platform. Next slide, please. So in the early stage, starting about 2010, we first tried to address long-term HIV medication adherence using a very basic program. You see on the left, we had a little editorial manager where we could enter text messages as reminders. And one of the innovations we had back then is patients could put reminders in their own words. So they did all kinds of funny messages, remember your grandmother, did you take your two, meaning your medicines, things like that. So they could put in their own words what they wanted the reminder to be. And you can see in the little bubble here, the patient talking about it did everything leading up to my decision to get back involved in my life, take my meds on time, stop drinking, stop using drugs, etc., be more accountable. And so we thought we were onto something by giving them something in their pocket, a phone, that had a program where they could hear in their own voice these reminders. Next slide, please. So as time went on and phones got more robust, we moved into an automated text messaging platform. This was called Treatment Extension by Text, and this was specifically designed for people living with HIV who also had substance use going on. And so you can see this is an iPhone looking interface, an early one. But what we retained in this project was the same kind of personalized messages, people telling themselves in their own voice that you see on the lower right. Keep your head up, God loves you, don't forget your grandchildren, even things like you need to clear it up. These were all examples of patient designed messages that they wanted to receive through this now automated text messaging system. Next slide, please. And in that pilot study, we found really good outcomes. We had strong usage, much longer than we expected over a 12-week period. Patients received and sent hundreds of messages. They responded to over 60% of all the different kinds of queries we sent about their medication taking, their mood, and substance use. And controlling for the baseline values, pharmacy refill adherence, meaning did they get their medications refilled on time for HIV, improved by 12%. And again, we got quotations from participants showing that they really enjoyed the platform and wanted more of it. Next slide, please. So around this time, when we got those good results, we were still considering, should we stick with text messaging, which was well studied and a very robust platform, or should we move to an app? And at this point, a lot of patients in our clinics were starting to get at least rudimentary smartphones, and they really wanted something that would make their smartphones appealing to help manage their HIV care. Next slide, please. So we developed a clinic deployed platform development strategy, and really we wanted to do a couple of things with any app we developed. We wanted to actually boost the connection to the HIV care team between the patients and the team. Because we had so many patients coming from a long distance, we wanted to sort of shrink that distance by giving them something in their pocket that they could access their team easily. We wanted to stick with self-monitoring of mood, stress, and medication adherence because that had worked really well before in our previous app. And our overall goal was to improve engagement in care and to maintain good connections to the patients. And we used a process called participatory human-centered design to develop a new app that could achieve these strategic goals. Next slide, please. We also based our development of this project on a couple of different theoretical models that had been well tested in the area of HIV care as well as some other areas. So in the middle, you can see the IMB, that means information, motivation, behavioral model, meaning if people have the information they need, they can implement the behaviors they want to do, and they have the motivation to keep it up. So we had a few features we wanted to use to exemplify the IMB model, such as providing vetted information from physicians about HIV care, keeping patient motivation to use the app up with quizzes and prizes for knowledge, and shaping their behavior over time by feedback about the self-monitoring they were going to do. We also drew on social action theory, where we wanted to address the need for community and prompt and support self-change processes by allowing users of the app to talk with each other anonymously on a community message board. And the artist model really helped us conceptualize that linkage relationship, keeping patients linked to care, to the whole care team. Next slide, please. So some of the components we designed initially were to address health behavior management for the long term. So we of course wanted the platform to be safe and private to use. And so we put a number of features in to ensure that if somebody else picked up the person's phone, they couldn't get into the app and potentially reveal that this person was living with HIV. We wanted to promote self-management long-term of HIV care with adherence tracking, mood and stress tracking. And of course, we had the care coordination with the clinic team and social support through the anonymous community messaging board. We also had an array of educational resources, videos, audio clips, little one-page learning items to promote mastering HIV care. Next slide, please. So this is what the original app looked like. It was called Positive Links because patients in our clinic wanted to be linked to each other and to care. And you can see that there's a simple query about taking medication, how are you feeling with the little face emoji, and then what's your stress level. Next slide. The How Am I screens give patients feedback continuously about what they have entered in the app before, to do the self-monitoring and to check on how am I doing really over time? Are there certain times of the week that I'm having more stress? Are there certain problems that I'm having that are causing me to rate my mood poorly? Next slide. And the community board looks a little bit like this. It keeps getting modified, but these screens show how community posts, people can post about themselves, they can post anything they really want within certain behavioral standards that we set up at the beginning. And we also post things called Motivational Mondays, where we get some little factoids that are fun, emotional things that help people to stay motivated. And community posts can be responded to by other members. We call them members rather than users, members on Positive Links. And members enjoy this because, as you see in this quote, when you're down, somebody uplifts you. When somebody else is down, you can uplift them. It's basically like a big family. Next slide, please. So those appealing features led to these very positive outcomes in the very first trial that we did. This was a 12-month prospective trial with our non-urban people living with HIV cohort, and we saw significant improvements in retention and care, so continuing to go to their clinic visits as scheduled, and viral suppression, which is really the thing that keeps people healthy a long time when living with HIV, over a year of follow-up. So we thought we were onto something and we kept going. Next slide. So in Positive Links 1.0, we had a provider portal, which you see on the big screen here. And in 2.0, we added a provider app so providers could more easily and at a time that was convenient to them, respond to messages or prompt messages to their patients. And at this time, we also started to distribute this app to other Virginia HIV clinics across our state because they had heard about this and they really wanted to have this for their patients as well. Next slide. We also added secure messaging with providers, as I was saying, and there's some conversations here that you can see on the left. And we ended up getting developers to join our team permanently rather than using outside contractors, which we had done early on. We also looked longer term at the success of maintaining viral suppression. And you can see on the right, over 24 months, viral suppression improved from 61% originally to 84%. So we had some long-term impact and we decided to, again, keep going. Let's go to the next slide. You can move on to the next slide. And so we wanted to make it easier to use. And one of the things we saw was, although we had a display of lab results, not everybody understood what that really meant. So on the far left screen, you'll see how it used to look. And then on the right two screens is sort of what we changed it to, so that you can see my viral load in the middle panel. It's 200, my viral load is down, and that's excellent. And so you see the graph going down. On the far right panel, what do my lab numbers mean? We gave an explanation. If your CD4 is up, that's good for HIV care. If your viral load is down, that's good. So all along the way, we tried to make it very understandable and easier to use and get feedback to take care of one's own HIV. Next slide. Messages were used most heavily by patients who were struggling to maintain care. And so we thought this is perfect. And these are a couple of quotations from patients who were using it. I can contact my provider more frequently now. I like to have that option, and it's convenient to be able to talk with doctors and nurses. It's made me care more about continuing in care. So all of these reactions kept us going. Next slide. We also developed a Spanish version of the app in concert with our Spanish patients because we have a subset of patients who speak mostly Spanish in our clinic, and we wanted to make sure that they were served as well. Next slide. And all along the way, we continued to do research on usage of positive links, what the impact was, and even some of the ethical challenges of how people got access to positive links, or how people had access or didn't to adequate mobile phones, and how can we finance that for people who don't have phones. So we did a wide-ranging set of research on this platform. Next slide. This led to us being noted in a CDC compendium as an evidence-informed intervention for retention and care, which we were very excited about. And this was related to linkage to retention and re-engagement in HIV care long-term. So long-term behavior change. Next slide. We then made Positive Links usual care in our home clinic here in Charlottesville in 2017, and later in other clinics with the health department supporting some of the implementation in other clinics outside of ours. And we now have 22 implementations in 7 US states and 4 countries. Next slide. We also are using Positive Links in a number of NIH-funded studies because we are continuing to research its impact with different subpopulations. And we found that Positive Links for Youth was a very interesting project in San Antonio, where we had mostly people who spoke both Spanish and English who were younger, and we're awaiting the final results of that RCT. We attempted to use it in a data to care project, which didn't really get off the ground in the way we hoped. But we also have some ongoing tests of it in other settings, including in the Florida cohort, which is a large longitudinal cohort down in Florida, and a new project with a K Award, a career development awardee in Florida as well, in rural Florida. And we also have an adaptation, not in HIV care, but for prevention of cervical cancer in Nicaragua. So we've got a wide range of studies that are testing how this kind of technology can help with a number of issues, even beyond HIV care long-term. Next slide. Part of what I think the secret sauce has been is we have what we call a community of practice. And these are some of our staff members who facilitate that community of practice. So all of the centers and sites that are using Positive Links are invited to participate in this community of practice and really understand how to implement PL in their sites, how to integrate it with clinic processes kind of seamlessly, how to get their participants in terms of their staff members and physicians and nurses to certify knowledge of Positive Links so that they'll use it. And then we have a company owned by UVA that's disseminating it in cases where we can't do that in a research implementation. Next slide. So a couple things we think are promoting this behavior maintenance long-term, where people are using Positive Links over time. And if you can click, it'll reveal the little factors below. So one is that we have long-term high usage, which is actually quite unusual. Most people getting an app on their phone use it a few times and then abandon it and never use it again. In contrast, we have long-term high usage. This is based on clinically significant impact in our research studies. We know that impact actually relates to usage, so people who use it more do better with their care. And we consider this a warm health technology where users feel supported by their clinic team. It's really a connection to care intervention. And that has meant that users are very enthusiastic and patients really love it, and they feel some ownership over it. There's a community of practice that involves patients. And we're continuing to iterate using this user-centered design ethos and doing ongoing research to improve the platform and its utility. Next slide. We've also benefited from a public academic partnership. Our Virginia Department of Health has been very visionary in supporting through the Ryan White grants some of our early development of Positive Links and helped us to scale it beyond our own home clinic with this turnkey system that includes how to implement it in your clinic. Next slide. So really how I think about this is we are shifting the paradigm of care. So early on in our work, we felt like patients were sort of on the outside of the care system and struggling sometimes to remain in care, especially for a stigmatized illness like HIV. And now we're moving more into the right side of the panel where through self-monitoring, care coordination with their clinic staff, getting educational resources and social support from each other in an anonymized way, the patients are experiencing more facilitated care, and they're now at the center of that care, supported by this phone app. Next slide. And our patients give us commentary all the time, and this one really is very touching to me. I don't know if many of you realize it, but each and every one of us who uses this app is making a difference in someone else's life, battling every day of this journey. We're all making a difference together, one day, one app, and one click at a time. And so it shows you that the participants really value this technology that they have access to and that they can use long term. Next slide. I just wanted to comment that this was certainly not a single person effort. You can see myself and my close colleague, Rebecca Dillingham. We're the ones who eventually came up with this and developed it, but we have a whole team supporting this project and technology to try to support people long-term living with HIV. Next slide. This is my contact information. If you want to send me an email or a question, I'm happy to take those questions. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Ingersoll. This is really great to hear about these programs that have been widely disseminated and embedded in communities and the design and experience. We have one more presentation for this session, and then we will still have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. We're running just a few minutes behind schedule, but we have a buffer, so I think we are great. So thank you so much for everyone's attention. We are delighted to be joined by a team from San Diego State University that is going to provide some information about their work with church-based multi-level interventions, promoting and sustaining physical activity in Latinas. And we are joined by Ms. Jennifer Schneider and Ms. Marissa Torres Ruiz. Would you like to share your screen?
Do that, yep. Here. Can you see that full screen?
We are not yet. Now we are in full screen. That is great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we are representing our PI, Dr. Elva Arredondo, today from the Institute for Behavioral and Community Health at San Diego State University. And as mentioned, we'll be sharing some of our work designing and developing strategies to implement and sustain multi-level health behavior interventions, specifically focusing on programming at the organizational level in partnership with churches. So my name is Jen. I'm the research manager for this study, and again, joined by Marissa, who's a PhD candidate leading the sustainment efforts on this project.
Thank you, Jen. So our presentation today will focus on org level sustainment. We know that program sustainment at the org or systems level increases the likelihood that individual level behaviors are maintained over time. And so we'll be sharing with you our sustainment approach for our program, Faith in Action, or Fe en Acción. Faith in Action is an evidence-based intervention, and it's being implemented across 32 faith-based organizations in San Diego County. And the unique thing of being centered in a faith-based organization is that it really allows us to provide equitable access to physical activity programming and to reach populations that are typically not engaged in research. So our intervention is led by community health workers or promotoras, and it does target Latina women. We offer a variety of physical activity classes that incorporate cardiovascular exercises and strength training. And we also administer motivational interviewing support calls to our participants. Our intervention lasts for 12 months, and we are currently testing sustainment at both the individual and organizational level. So the figure on this slide illustrates the layout and the data collection time points of our study. So as I mentioned, we have a 12-month intervention period, which is preceded by our recruitment and enrollment phase of both churches and individuals. So those are the top green boxes in this figure. And immediately after our intervention period, we enter into our sustainment period, which is that white box. And so our sustainment period is 6 months long. And during this time, grant funding stops for all intervention activities. So that includes promotora salaries, the support that we receive from our centralized promotora coordinator, and we also come back or completely remove our interaction with church staff and leaders. The yellow boxes in this figure toward the bottom denote our 3 arms. So as you can see, we have a standard arm, an enhanced arm, and our final arm, which is that sustainment arm. So only those churches which are randomized to that sustainment condition will be receiving our sustainment strategies. And all of these strategies will be provided to each of our churches ahead of the sustainment period, and that will enable us to provide a soft transition into sustainment. So our strategies are informed by various sources of data. We are including some initial data that was collected at the close of the original trial, and we are also pulling data from our current churches of the current trial, which have provided some really insightful information about their preferences for sustaining the program. We've also gathered information from focus groups, which are held with our community health workers, so 3 to date. We've conducted about 88 brief interviews with expert stakeholders, including funders and potential partners. And this has really provided the opportunity for our team to speak with community-based organizations and also stakeholders at the county, state, and national level. We, of course, have had in-depth conversations with our organizational leadership, and that was conducted during our pre-implementation phase. So we've completed 26 interviews with church leaders and staff members. And our staff, our research staff, has also recently integrated qualitative and ethnographic field notes just to be able to capture some of the nuances of the church environment that aren't measured elsewhere. So we're pulling from all of these different sources to inform how we operationalize sustainment of our program. So next, I'd like to walk you through our approach for conceptualizing our strategies for sustainment. So on the left, we've started with identifying theoretical elements from the sustainment literature. That has been coupled with input from our community advisory board. And we've also pulled from the previous experience of our investigative team to identify our middle tier, which you see there. And those are our core fundamental components that are driving our sustainment strategies. So the sustainment components have been grouped together, and we've mapped these onto our specific strategies. We've color-coded them a bit here so you can see how each of the fundamental components matches to each one of our strategies. So as you can see on the right, we've identified 5 strategies to increase our capacity for organizational sustainment. So that first one, establishing an internal system for feedback. Number 2, achieving funding stability or the development of an independent funding model. 3, ensuring personnel continuation and a protocol for when we start to see staff turnover. Number 4, continued support and technical assistance for our promotoras. And our 5th strategy is really cross-cutting. We believe that that could be embedded throughout strategies 2 through 4, and that is community partnerships. So we know that community partnerships are vital to achieving sustainment, and it's something that our team will continue to foster and advocate for. So these collective strategies will serve as the foundation to our approach for organizational program sustainment.
So I'll share a little bit about exactly how we're operationalizing those 5 strategies. So we use the foundations of what's known as form and function, which comes from research and program adaptation, which helps us to identify what are the core elements of our intervention, and then giving us flexibility within those core elements about how we're going to define and carry out each of those ones. We often hear this referred to as like freedom within a framework. So maintaining fidelity to a function, even if it may look different or have different forms of how we operationalize it. So each of our 5 sustainment strategies that Marissa mentioned are our functions, those underlying elements of the aspects that we think that group of strategies we're hypothesizing are the mechanisms of action. So those internal systems for feedback, the funding model, personnel continuation protocol, support for the promotoras, and community partnerships are the 5 functions we want to achieve as our intervention strategies for the sustainment condition. The form of how we operationalize those exactly, what they really look like on the ground in the community, varies because there's a lot of different ways we can achieve a funding model. There's a lot of different ways we can support and fund promotoras. And those are going to require flexibility because the reality of community work and sustainment is we need that fidelity to the function, but there's less rigidity than in kind of the standard behavioral work we're used to, where we can't have a one size fits all. We have to have that variability in the form in order to help it fit each church, because every church community has its own unique barriers and unique facilitators to implementation and to sustainment of programs. And so as an example, we'll draw from that 3rd strategy, which is replacing and training promotoras when turnover inevitably occurs. So during our effectiveness trial and during our grant-funded study period, this is a role the research team takes on. If a promotora for some reason cannot continue to carry on the role of promotora, she can't do it forever, right? Personal circumstances come up, whether it's an injury, so she's no longer able to lead physical activity classes, or personal family circumstances that make her unavailable to continue to lead the intervention. If it's during the study period, our research team really takes on that role of working with the church to identify someone who would be a good promotora, someone from that church community, and we provide the training. We have the materials. It's a lot of hours of hands-on training and mentorship and support to help the promotoras to lead the program. If we're hoping that this program can sustain beyond the life of the grant, we have to identify who can take that role on instead of the university and the research team in our absence. And so we learned actually after the effectiveness trial, when speaking with our promotoras, that even though an aim of that study was not intervention sustainment, many of the promotoras on their own chose to attempt to sustain the program in their churches. But the barrier to sustainment was that when that woman could no longer carry on, again, injuries, personal family circumstances, the program ended because there was no way to replace her. There was no one who could train someone new. There was no one who could identify the new person who could kind of come up and take their place. And so because we knew that was a major barrier to sustaining the program, we've identified this replacement and training of promotoras as a key function that needs to take place within our sustainment strategies. There's a few different forms that it could take on. And so here, each of these 3 boxes indicates one way that we could replace and train promotoras. And all of these, again, come from the interviews that we've been doing with our community partners. One of these is that we could identify an external partner to help churches identify and train those new promotoras. So essentially a community partner who could take on the role that the university has been taking on or the research team has had throughout the course of the intervention period. Some of the potential facilitators to that are that there's a lot of community organizations who are enthusiastic about this work, who are already doing work with promotoras, already training promotoras. However, a barrier may be if someone else is kind of absorbing this into their current programs, they may not maintain the same degree of fidelity to our training protocols or to our program as it exists now. Another potential form that this strategy could take on is that we could provide, and prior to the sustainment period beginning, providing the current promotoras tools so that they can train someone new to replace themselves. So that when a promotora knows that she's no longer able to carry on delivering the intervention, she could then train someone, either one of the current people who attends her classes, who has stood out as exemplar, or someone else in the community who's another lay leader who could take on the role of promotora. we would have to develop materials and kind of come up with this train the trainer model where the promotoras we have currently are equipped so that they're able to then train someone else, and that someone else would then be able to train someone else. And it kind of works in this chain down of there would always be someone to replace the promotora who has to step out. And then the final option that we've identified within this strategy is potentially having a large group of promotoras, many women, rather than what we currently have, which is 2 women, 2 promotoras from each church delivering the intervention. We could have a larger group of women at each church that each have a smaller role. So there's more shared accountability while delivering the program. And if one person then is no longer able to continue, there's still this large group of others who can also continue. And for training others, they could continually be mentoring new people who are coming in. It would create shared accountability. It would create flexibility, ability to potentially branch out and give additional classes within the intervention because there's more people there. And this model fits very well within what a lot of churches are doing with their other programming, is that there's often many, many, many people who are sort of under someone who's heading up a ministry. There's a lot of volunteers that kind of do little pieces. And so this is something that other health behavior interventions in churches have done, and it's something that's very normal to the workflows of churches. And so what we'll be doing next is taking these different forms within each function and returning to our church leaders to explore specific barriers and facilitators within those individual churches. While the interviews and the data we've collected so far informed general barriers and potential barriers and facilitators to each of those strategies, we need to know within each church, what are their specific barriers? So of these strategies, which one is going to be the best fit for them? So we'll be revisiting each of our churches, providing them with essentially a menu of sustainment options within each of our 5 strategies. And maintaining fidelity to those 5 strategies, to the function of those 5 strategies, while adapting the form. And so for each of the 5 strategies, we would provide those 3 to, in some cases, we have 6 or 7 or 8 different forms that strategy could take on. We'll provide them those options, explain what we mean by each of them, and they would be able to provide us specific feedback on their preferences, on the barriers, and on the facilitators to each of those strategies so that we can tailor our sustainment options to better fit each of the churches. We'll start by doing this with the church leaders and staff, but we'll also be integrating perspectives from multiple parties. Because while there may be a church where the church leaders are very enthusiastic about one strategy, the promotoras may see barriers to that strategy taking place. The church leader could say, oh yes, that's definitely a great way to train promotoras, and the promotoras who are on the ground running the program say, no, that's not feasible at all, or vice versa. And so we want to make sure that we're integrating this feedback from all of our different parties to make sure that the sustainment strategies, the way we're operationalizing each of the sustainment strategies is tailored and specific to that church to increase the likelihood that they're able to sustain the program. And our key takeaway, and this is ongoing, our team is very new to the world of sustainment, but our main takeaway I think so far is to think about sustainment early on. So if you have a health behavior intervention that you're hoping to someday be able to sustain beyond the life of research grants, thinking about the organizational level now, in part because there's a lot of planning that needs to take place. If we're building partnerships between churches and other community organizations, it takes time to foster those relationships. If we have to develop new trainings and new materials, it takes a lot of time to develop those materials. And so we should start planning for sustainment really early in the intervention period, as well as thinking about sustainment during intervention design. I think that our team may have designed our program or our intervention differently if we knew what we know now about sustainment, so that it were something that would be a little bit easier or have fewer barriers to sustaining. So we're still learning a lot, but we're hoping that what we're able to do is help our intervention to sustain and therefore help enhance behavioral maintenance of physical activity and reduction of chronic disease over time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the presenters in this session. And thank you for all of our attendees for putting in some questions. I encourage you to continue to submit questions in the question and answer. At this point, we will have all of our presenters from session 2 available to answer questions. Janaya, could you also put up our poll question number 4? I just want to draw everyone's attention to this. I know Sydney O'Connor also put it in the chat, but we really appreciate everyone's responses so far to the word cloud, and we had one final question regarding what you are hearing from our presenters regarding factors that support health behavior maintenance programs in clinical and community settings. And so we have our link here. And so as we are going through our discussion and reflecting on these wonderful presentations, please send along your top of mind thoughts about these factors that can support health behavior maintenance programs in clinical and community settings. The information is also in the chat. Thanks, Janaya. I think now we can spotlight all of our presenters for session 2 and get into our question and answer period. I know Dr. Arredondo also was able to join us, and so if we're up to Dr. Arredondo, if she would like to come off camera, but she's also welcome to join as a discussant. Hello. So we have gotten some questions that are specifically related to sustained participant engagement in programs. And I think we're really thinking about sustainment on a few different levels. So sustainment of programs in communities and at community settings, but also continued interaction and engagement of the participants that are using either the app or participating in the DPP. And so I was hoping that each of you could comment specifically about any facilitators or barriers that you have seen that impact sustained person engagement with these programs and necessary resources. And I know there were specific questions about how many people are still using Positive Links and how many people stay in the DPP program. So if you're able to address that as you're thinking broadly about person engagement, that would be great as well. Dr. Ingersoll, do you want to get us started?
Sure. I saw the question about Positive Links. So the most recent look back we did over a 12-month period was that about 88% of people who were enrolled in Positive Links were actively using it. So the other folks, in some cases, they might have transferred clinic or moved to a different place. But in general, we have 80% and up, even across other sites that have implemented it. And, you know, I don't think there's anything magic about the app per se, but it is very handy for people to have it with them all the time. And so that's one thing that makes it easier than like if they have to go to the Y to go to the program, you know, they might get deterred by weather or something like that. So I think those programs that need people to actually move to a location to get the program have a higher bar. It's harder to get long-term sustainability, and yet they're also very important. So I'd love to hear what the other presenters have to say about what's going on there.
Thank you. Dr. Marrero, do you want to add anything about sustainment of person engagement in the DPP and potentially even sustaining health behaviors beyond that 12-month active intervention period?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because one of the observations with the YMCA programs is that after about a year, people got a little burned out and the follow-up drops off, but they achieve the goal. I really want to underscore what my colleagues from San Diego said. A promotora model is essential because we were using community-based coaches. You know, we were using people from the community, that knew the issues, that had experienced the barriers, made an enormous difference to do that. So I really commend you guys. I loved your presentation, by the way. Very cool way of framing it. But it's I think that's, you know, community involvement and in the planning, community involvement and the sustainability is the essential component. Without that, you know, your drop off and your failure rate will be exceedingly higher.
Great, thank you. And does the team from San Diego have anything to add about your experiences with sustained participant engagement?
Yeah, I can jump in, and my apologies for joining in a little later. As I had a prior commitment, but I really enjoyed, I was able to catch part of the other presenters. And I think I want to comment on the facilitators for maintenance. I think that what's going for us, or at least in the church context, there's, you find a lot of church cohesion and community members are connected to each other. And so that social accountability, that social support really goes a long ways for community members. And I think that that's what helps people come back. And the other piece, and actually Dr. Marrero mentioned that it made me reflect on, is that we don't have like if you miss a week or two, you know what I mean? It not each session builds on each other. So that people still feel okay coming back if they're out for a few weeks. But I have worked in programs where they do build each other, and that tends to be a barrier as well. So I think that those are the two facilitators that I can think of at the moment. I don't know, Marissa and Jen, if you have other additional ones at the individual level.
I think it's definitely the promotoras, that they have those interpersonal, personal relationships with others in the church. They know them, they recognize them, they see you on Sunday. So even if you're not coming to the classes, there can be that nudge because you're interacting in other contexts. And the promotoras have noted, for those who really don't want to come, they avoid me when they see me in other places, right? But there's still that acknowledgement that they see you, they make you feel welcome. And so really the interpersonal skills of the promotora is a huge facilitator to continuing engagement.
Just to add a comment to that, in the DPP model, which was a group model which built accountability amongst the players, even when the course ran its course, the members took it upon themselves to contain and move forward, which was incredibly exciting to me. All of a sudden, they're making arrangements, and well, we can meet at Starbucks and have a coffee and that kind of thing. There's a group that started off the program that still meets at Starbucks weekly. This is years later,
Wow.
Social
It's that
support.
social
is a big deal.
support and connection.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm laughing because we had the promotora issue at church, and you're right, they avoid them when they decide they want to sneak away.
That's great.
Thank
I
you
think
so
we're
much.
also, I was just going to mention, I think we're also organically seeing in some churches, they're knowing that, the program is going to be ending soon, and they're starting to crowdsource or strategize among themselves. Like, how can we keep this going? Does this need to be donation based? Like, who can supply what? So we're like, wait, don't start doing those things yet. That's our role. Like, we need to come in and to support some of those strategies. But yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful when it can almost be like self-sustaining.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of leads to another question that came up in the chat, but really thinking about how the communities or clinics outside of your own individual experience kind of start to take ownership or start to expand these programs. The specific question was related to Jennifer and Marissa, to your presentation, in considering replacement and training of promotoras, if you had a train the trainer approach. But I think that also gets to some of the larger issues about how these programs can continue with different models to keep community leaders engaged or think about training. So if you could start, Jennifer and Marissa, by discussing a little bit about considering the train the trainer approach. Then I'd also like to hear from others about ways that they've been able to train community members to maintain.
We've definitely thought a bit about train the trainer models. Is something our team's familiar with and excited about. Where we're trying to figure out within the church context is who can that trainer be? And so can we train promotoras to train new promotoras? And there's a little bit of hesitation about like if that would be feasible, if the promotoras would have the self-efficacy and the skills to be trained in how to train another promotora because our training is so intensive. Or if we could, it's come up, we're like, could we train church leaders and staff to then train promotoras? But church leaders and staff, we have learned, do not have capacity for that, and it's not a priority. And so we've also considered, again, within that strategy of community partnerships, could we have we could train a community partner who could then train the promotoras. And so I think a few of our models are related to, or our potential ideas we're considering are related to a train the trainer kind of model. But we're working out the kinks in the specific barriers within each of those.
I think another thing we're also very mindful about is the educational background and the literacy. of our promotoras, right? So I would say we have a good amount of promotoras that are Spanish speaking only, which is great, right, as the implementer, because they're going into these communities and most of the women at these parishes are Spanish speaking as well. But when you think about the training, the curriculum, putting them through a certificate program, and even, you know, one of our strategies is to enable them to apply for funding on their own. Thinking through, you know, what would that training look like? What is the language that we provide to them, or what are templates that we can develop that we can hand off that are actually user friendly? And it's not something that is, you know, so advanced or academic that we develop and then never gets used. So we are trying to be mindful about that as well, just different literacy levels and just competency levels as well from the promotoras. So, although I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to mention as well.
Great. Other thoughts? I know, you know, Karen, you mentioned that you have this ongoing communication with clinics where they're able to come and troubleshoot, but also are the ones leading the program. So how you have thought about that training that's necessary for dissemination and sustainment.
Yeah, it's been sort of a two-part training that we've developed at this point. We used to train everybody in person, other clinics, and sort of have a mentoring process. That turned out to not be as sustainable as we hoped. And so we ended up developing a learning management system, an online system that teaches new clinic implementers the majority of what they need to know about implementing positive links, but then they also get invited to the monthly community of practice meetings where they meet with other people who are using this platform and brainstorm together, you know, any things that are maybe not working as well. And our team attends those also to listen in and find out what are things that are tripping people up, whether it's the end user, the person living with HIV who's being supported, or whether it's somebody in the clinic that's deploying it, and try to troubleshoot that way.
I'd like to add one thing, and Marissa, you tickled this in my mind. We always assume that with a promotora model that they'll sort of just volunteer and do it. And there's so many barriers to that because of the life spectrum that everybody lives in. So we've come up with models to pay them to make it actually reimbursable to them. And we've offloaded that into the community partners. You know, they're surprisingly willing to do that. And there's some quid pro quo with that. You know, they sometimes want them to do other things and stuff like that. But in terms of fidelity, if we have a curricula that makes any sense, you know, and it accommodates the literacy issues, which are formidable, but when we start paying them, we get a better quality player. You know what I mean? Somebody who says, hey, I could use this income and I'm really willing to do it. And they invest a little bit more in the energy. That made a big difference for us in Tucson. You know, it just made a big difference. And so I was stunned at how many people were willing to support them from the community to put money into the game. You know, so I would kick that one around a little bit.
Great, thank you so much. I did want to ask a question, thinking about the arc of this workshop series. We've thought a lot about, you know, measurement and monitoring and intervention within a research period where we have a primary outcome and a specific endpoint. And as we're translating these programs to clinical and community settings, there may not be a fixed intervention period. So how have you conceptualized or thought about either criteria that you use for monitoring or metrics of success for programs that have been deployed into these clinical and community settings?
I mean, one thing we've thought about a lot is reach, right? So of clinic patients, how many people are reached and are actually using the platform? And that also goes for the clinic staff, right? The team members, how many of them are we reaching and who are using the platform? Because that's how they support their patients. So we've looked at, you know, of the proportion of patients and clinicians, how many are actively using it on a month-to-month basis. And we'll provide feedback reports to the sites about that. because we can see that on the back end, and that's sometimes very useful. Sometimes it's a matter of somebody changed phones and they forgot about how to put their positive links back on their new phone. And so, it's often an easy fix, but it allows clinics or agencies using this to really have some visibility into how well are they doing over time.
How do you do in San Diego?
We're working on that. I'll let you,
Yeah.
Marissa.
I think we're all smiling because I get my hand slapped a little bit because I get really excited around evaluation. And sometimes we'll jump to that part and they're like, wait a minute, let's back up a bit. How are we going to measure this? But I think we're pulling from a few sources. So right now we're juggling like some REAIM frameworks, looking at that maintenance, just that maintenance piece. We also have a co-investigator, Dr. Larry Palinkas, who has some sustainment measures as well. So we may integrate some of that. But yeah, I think that's the exciting part, right? So it's like adapting or being able to pull from different sources to make sure we're capturing at these different levels, the different metrics of success. So like Jen mentioned, it's going to look different for every church. And we want to make sure that, maybe one church is really into attendance so that we're capturing attendance. Or like we've heard from one priest that he wants to look at the biometrics. So talk to me about like the hypertension and the weight loss and the steps. And so we're like, oh, there might be a great area there with like HIPAA concerns or like IRB, but yes, we will get you like whatever we can to demonstrate those numbers. So I think at least for our team, it is going to be pulling from different sources. And like Dr. Ingersoll mentioned, just having that feedback loop to leadership, some type of a report or something that we can demonstrate. We can have our community health workers demonstrate to leadership why they should continue to support our programming.
It's interesting because in our diabetes prevention model, we learn pretty quickly that there's a half-life to showing up somewhere and doing it. You know what I mean? But we suddenly discovered from the promotoras that people were seeking other things. So they suddenly got online, phone apps and stuff, and they're using them and they're keeping their weight where they want it and stuff like that. But it doesn't mean that we failed. To me, it means that we stimulated them to adapt in their own model. You know what I mean? Which I think is okay. So we've had to have our promotoras periodically do assessments in the community just to say, hey, what are the people doing about this? And sometimes, oh my God, there's this new program over at the Catholic Church over here, because I don't use the Catholic Church very often for my programs. You know what I mean? So this Sunday they discovered everybody's offloading there, and I'm happy with that. I know it's not exactly the scientific outcome we always want, but if they're continuing the behavior, then I think we've succeeded,
That's what we've been reading a lot of literature and have some co-investigators with sustainment expertise that are really broadening our view of what it means to assess sustainment. So there's obviously the individual level. Are our participants continuing their behaviors? Are they continuing to be physically active? Are their health outcomes continuing? But then there's also the organizational level. Are they continuing to offer the program? But even, if they can't offer the program in its entirety, if they can continue to offer just a couple of the classes from the program. And my mind was completely blown by one of our investigators. She's like, even if there's a sustained interest in health, even if there's a program that shows up at the church because of Faith in Action, that is about something else like nutrition or diabetes prevention education that is brought in because Faith in Action sparked that interest in the church in health, that is something that's sustained thanks to this intervention, even if it's not at all what our intervention was intending to do. So there are those continued effects at the organizational and the individual and the community level, even if they weren't the ones that we were planning for.
That's a win.
That's great. Yeah. So we this time always goes so quickly. We have about 2 minutes left. And in our final 2 minutes, I would ask our SCG team to just bring up the results of the word cloud. And again, that polling question asked about factors that support health behavior maintenance programs. And I would just ask each of our presenters to consider your own background and also kind of regardless of your target population, what do you really see as the key characteristic for successful community and clinical behavior maintenance programs? What factor do you think has been the most important? It could be something that's highlighted in this word cloud or something that's come from your work and experience.
I'd love to note that all of these projects had a big focus on community engagement and actually hearing from the end users, the participants of the program, what they want and how they want to get it. I think that's a huge thing that some of us are researchers, you know, we might not think about that first, but I think hearing from the community, what is the demand and what do they need? And then responding to that is a huge factor in success for all of us.
Thank you. Anyone else want to have a final thought on a key factor that really supports the sustainment of these behavior maintenance programs?
I can jump in. So I think for us, a lot of what we've been doing is trying to understand, well, what are some of the values and what's important to our community stakeholders, whether it's a funder, you know, and if they're interested in supporting the program, well, how can we demonstrate that their investment is helping achieve the goals that they want to see, right? So it's like trying to figure out like this puzzle and figure out, okay, well, you know, the church leader may be interested in engagement. Okay, how do we measure that so that they can still maintain interest and make sure that we have their support? So it's really all about flexibility and being open to different ideas in terms of sustaining different aspects of the program and how to make sure that we deliver what they're interested in supporting.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for sharing your experiences and your wonderful presentations and this really rich discussion. We will hopefully be able to have some wrap up at the end, but I would encourage everyone to take a look at some of the factors also listed on this word cloud. I think we see some threads from this morning as well: relationship building, addressing stigma, absolutely community participation, social support. So it's wonderful to see all of this come together. And thank you. Thank you so much. We can go ahead and take this slide down. And we are going to be oh, yes, Deborah, would you like to hop in?
So, well, I suppose I should be, I can't get, can you see me?
Yeah.
It's
Yes,
my
we can see
view.
you.
Yeah. I was looking at all of you. First of all, fabulous, fabulous presentations. It just is a thread. It feels like the theme has been woven through from the individual level to clinician support to taking evidence-based interventions in community settings and talking about how to sustain them. And so many of the concepts that you guys have elevated have been echoed throughout those different levels. Thank you, Maureen, for a wonderful moderation. Great questions. And at this point, we are going to transition to Dr. Alex Rothman, who is one of our external co-chairs. And he is going to introduce a kind of a distillation of the findings from prior meetings and what he has heard today and what are the implications of that. And Alex, I don't envy you, but I know you can do it.
Thank you for your faith. Let me go to here and then to here. I think we are good. Let me, well, okay, oops. Can people up? I have just lost my slide, so hold on a second.
We could see it, but I guess you couldn't.
Yeah, so I
Now
just
we
made,
see you.
I see me. Okay, hold on a second, sorry. Janai, can we undo something for a sec? Somehow I have gotten rid of my slides somehow. And I don't know how I did that. Do you have an insight?
Is the application open, the PowerPoint application?
Yeah, no, I just all of a sudden I saw it, and then all of a sudden I became the focus of attention, and rather than my slides.
Would be able to share them now. You were spotlighted before, which is why you were so.
Okay, let me just see what happens. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. There we go. Sorry, folks. Okay, I think we're there. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks, Deborah, and thanks for your faith, and thanks to everybody. I mean, I just want to echo what has been said. It's been an extraordinary day, and it's been just a powerful number of insights and voices and experiences, and it has truly enriched the conversation. My job is to do something very briefly in about sort of 8 minutes or so. So please be mindful of that as I begin the journey. I'm just going to sort of situate today in the context of the broader whole workshop series. I know that some of you, and I've noticed some of your names in the participant link. There's those of you who've been with us over the past year at all of these, for some or all of it, and that's just been wonderful. But I know some of you are maybe just joining us today. And so so let me just say, so as was noted at the very outset this morning, when Mike sort of set us up, we've sort of organized this this workshop as a series of interconnected events, and we began now, back in March of 23 with a conversation that was really just focused on just what is behavior maintenance. We followed that up with a conversation in September that sort of had two parts. These were two separate days. One that really focused on sort of how do we think about, how do we conceptualize, and in particular, how do we measure maintenance? Followed up by a third meeting that was at that point 2 days later, that really sort of asked the question of sort of, well, what are the promising strategies available to us to promote maintenance? What can we glean from sort of the evidence base, and then finally that gets us to today, and here, we're really asking ourselves sort of, what can we learn? How can we leverage? How can we capitalize on the insights that we've heard today from people with the lived experience, the people who are developing and out in practice, maintaining, designing, implementing interventions. And so what I'd like to just do so ever so briefly is sort of to sort of talk about each of these workshops and take a moment and really highlight sort of what I would sort of suggest is a sort of key observation, and then also what I would highlight as a key challenge. I want to just sort of note, I forget, maybe it was Deborah or someone who said will be available sort of written summaries for all of these meetings, and so my apologies in some sense to the rich conversation and participations. I'm distilling a day's long worth of meetings into 2 bullet points, and so I would say, sort of as we go all the way back into March of 23, I would say one of the key observations was the emergence, as we begin to think about behavior maintenance. It's sort of, we have to think about it both maybe as a phase, as a pattern of behavior that people are engaging with, but also as a dynamic process. And sort of, and this is, you're going to see some themes, I think, come up again and again in the conversation, which is behavior maintenance is the expression of a process that's supported by a set of psychological, interpersonal, and structural factors. And so as we think about understanding and studying and promoting behavior maintenance, we're sort of possibly want to be thinking about both of these things simultaneously. A key challenge then that sort of quickly emerges is, it's one thing to talk about behavior maintenance, and it's another thing to then talk about behavior maintenance within the specific context that one might be interested in. We've heard today about just a very, very rich set of health conditions, of different patterns of behavior. And so a real sort of challenge is sort of characterizing the ways in which behavior maintenance manifests itself. How is it similar? And then how is it different across these behavioral domains and health conditions? And that lots of the conversation about behavior maintenance is often, for lack of better words, siloed, you would say, within thoughtful work being done within different behavioral domains. And sort of one of the things that's been really exciting about these series of meetings and conversations is that we've been having conversations with people across, hosting conversations among people who are working in very, very different domains. Moving to that second meeting that was really focused on operationally on measuring behavior maintenance. Here really the key observation in some sense is that it's one thing to talk about maintenance. It's a whole nother thing to actually operationalize and define and then develop instruments or tools to measure behavior maintenance. And that consensus regarding what is maintenance, right? What is that criterion that we're most interested in is actually somewhat uneven across behavioral domains. At this meeting, we heard from people working in a variety of different behavioral domains, and you could see that in some domains, the sort of exemplar at that time or at that meeting is sort of work being done within smoking cessation, where there is some strong consensus in the field about what are the criterion we think about for operationalizing behavior maintenance. But within other behavioral domains, there's less consensus and less clarity, and that we need to really move forward in that sense. And I'm going to mention this again in a moment. And that here the key question or the key challenge is that really to advance progress, I think in both research and practice, we really need to develop clear standards for two things. I'm going to suggest is both criterion for what is the indicator, makes us sort of say, yeah, this individual or collective or groups, whatever the unit of analysis is, are maintaining behavior, but also for operationalizing what are meaningful deviations from maintenance, right? So if somebody, for example, is engaging in physical activity and has met some criterion that we've decided as a consensus is indicating that they are maintaining their physical activity over time, at what point should we be concerned that that individual is deviating from that pattern of behavior? Sort of what is that criterion? And that ends up being operationalizing that in certain domains has proven to be more challenging than perhaps one might like. Our third gathering, a third meeting, sort of I think a key observation that really emerges out of this. This is the meeting that really focused on what are evidence-based strategies for behavior maintenance, some of which we also heard about today, for example, is that there are a robust set of examples of interventions that promote behavior maintenance, but there remains a lack of clarity regarding what are the specific strategies, and I would actually sort of say, what are really the mechanisms of action that are particularly effective in promoting maintenance? What are the things we might want to really focus on promoting? And in particular, the conversation at this meeting, and I think it came up again today, is to really need to think broadly about what possible mechanisms of action are that are of interest to us. What are the things we really want to sort of, with our intervention strategies, promote that we think in turn will help people be more effective. And when I say thinking broadly, those mechanisms of action, very much particularly from the research scientist perspective, are very often thought of as sort of intrapsychic, psychological concepts in people's thoughts, beliefs, emotions, experiences, their sense of identity, and all of those are important. But I think we heard again and again, particularly today, and we heard at the meeting back last September, that there are other key factors. There are relational, there are sort of interpersonal processes that are critical that we might want to be targeting, and that there are system and structural things that we also need to be thinking about. And so really thinking broadly about mechanisms of action and thinking about what those, and so therefore what our strategies might be designed to target is something we really want to be thinking more about. And then I want to just sort of turn back to the sort of interplay between this meeting, the meeting we had about intervention strategies and the measure and on measurement, which is really that those two areas really critically depend on each other, which is that progress in advancing intervention development critically depend upon our efforts to improve the conceptualization and measurement of maintenance. In a sense, if we want to have evidence-based programs that show clear success in promoting maintenance, we're going to need clear consensus about what is that standard, what is that outcome that we're interested in obtaining, and again thinking about that carefully across different behavioral domains. And then finally, and I put this slide up somewhat modestly because I will confess I wrote these bullet points before we started this morning, and so I anticipated what was going to come, and so we could say much more. I mean, it seems I feel particularly self-conscious summarizing today's meeting that's just with us into bullet points, but I'll note two things that that really struck me and still strike me, having listened to all of our speakers today. And one is that strategies that we want to use to promote maintenance, if we want them to be successful, they really need to be responsive to the strengths and then also the needs of the communities in which they are implemented, right? And so this came up again and again in the conversations today about sort of really thinking with thoughtful engagement with the communities that these strategies are hoping to serve and the lives of the people they're trying to improve. And so we really need to be thinking about that in a flexible way. And then second, and this was something that we were just talking about, and so it seems quite timely, which is that we need to really think about how we enhance our ability to capitalize on these insights, right? So that the things that we're learning, the things that we can learn from practice, and the things that we've heard today from all of the different audiences and all the different individuals, how do we feed that back? How does that sort of come back to, in particular, sort of the more sort of research-focused community who are working in the trenches trying to think about designing and developing interventions? And how do we maximize and optimize that feedback? So finally, and I want to note, I think one of the things that sort of comes out of this meeting is the very thing that my colleagues and I sort of set forth when we began to design and launch this series of meetings, which is that advancing research and practice in health behavior maintenance is going to require us simultaneously addressing a multitude of issues, right? And so that a science of behavior change is going to has to involve efforts and initiatives that advance all of the things that are, in a sense, before you, what all of these different meetings have sort of focused on. We need to better understand our conceptualization of maintenance. We need to improve our ability to measure and operationalize maintenance. We need to continue to advance the development and design and dissemination of interventions to promote maintenance. And we need to think about how we actually do that outside of, or how we do that in the many, many communities whom we would want to help and serve. And that to do that, progress, that actual progress is going to require this sort of interdependence of progress in all these areas, right? So that moving forward in one is going to really require moving forward in the other, and that we're going to need, in a sense, a coordinated agenda to advance work in this area. And that coordinated agenda is critical and sometimes can feel quite daunting. But I guess I'd like to just end by saying, I think all of the meetings that we've had, the engagement around all 4 of these workshops, where we've really seen hundreds of people join us and spend the day with us on Zoom, sort of really indicates just a passion and a commitment for moving this forward, and an incredibly rich set of ideas and experiences that can inform that. So I leave feeling like there's an agenda that now will be crafted that comes out of all of these meetings. But I feel really quite confident that agenda is there before us, and that we are poised to turn that agenda into action that can sort of help and benefit all. So those are my comments. Am I turning it back to you, Deborah?
First, I want to thank you, Alex. That was a wonderful summary, and I think you connected all the pieces just beautifully especially in terms of our agenda and why we undertook this in the first place. But I'm going to hand it over to Mike,
okay,
who's one of our co-leads, and hopefully he's going to elevate some of the questions that have come out of all of this. You, Mike.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Alex. What a great day it's been, and just such a fascinating and lively conversation, important perspectives, and we're just truly grateful for all of our participants, all of our speakers, and for everyone who's here today. Alex put it very well, and I'm not sure that I could put it much better. I will say that in the course of fielding this series of 4 workshops, going from conceptualization to measurement to intervention and now implementation in real-world settings, we've always had the idea that we were going to both explore this very important area of health promotion and research around health behavior maintenance, but we also had the idea that we would in effect, kind of create maybe a further community, a connection, between interested individuals, clinicians, and researchers who want to work on this problem. And I think and I hope that we have been able to do that over time. Some of us on the planning committee kind of talked about how we would have a caravan. And of course, across the journey of these 4 workshops, we would meet different people along the way and add them, to our fold. And so you are a part of this community now, each of you in your own individual ways, in your clinical practice, and also in the research that you are doing and that has yet to be done. And so that's something that we really look forward to working together with you on. There are many questions that we have yet to answer in this area, and Alex has perfectly highlighted many of them around how we conceptualize behavior maintenance, how we can think about better monitoring it and providing feedback to people, about how we can design programs that can really help people sustain their health behaviors on the long term, and then how we can try to implement these in ways in real world settings and with real people that have real and sustained impact. And that's an ambitious research agenda, but it's one that together we can accomplish. Today, one of the things that we started with was the comments from Dr. Simoni. And Dr. Simoni was noting how important it is as we embark on this endeavor, that we really incorporate lived experience, and that we also really involve the community, to advance interventions that will have sustained use and impact. And so that's exactly what we've tried to do today, is these 2 things: incorporate lived experience and involve the community to advance interventions with sustained use and impact. I'm struck, I'll just say, by kind of, there's critical distinctions between an individual who's trying to practice a health behavior over the long term and an organization that's delivering a program to sustain health behavior. These are 2 different contexts, and there's many different influences there. But I'm kind of struck today by some of the parallels too, between the individuals and the organizations that we're working with and speaking to. As I think Alex noted, a critical theme today is tailoring care and programs to either individual or to organizational needs. For individuals to meet people where they are, to help address their basic individual needs, and for programs to get community input on what would have real utility, and to find an implementation model that's feasible and can have impact. We also heard about things like the importance of building supportive relationships and communities, both for individuals as well as for program implementers. For individuals, the critical importance of having a strong therapeutic alliance with your provider, a feeling of being cared for, and finding social support for your health behaviors. But then for programs, things like fostering a community of practice, creating a community to support the program and sustain its operation in ways that have efficacy, effectiveness in real-world settings, and attending to things like personnel continuity. So, tailoring and also attending to supportive relationships and community building, community input, these are important themes that we'll carry forward in all of our work as we continue this journey to understand, address, and support behavior maintenance. So thank you for your involvement. We're delighted to have everyone's feedback with the word clouds. That's a kind of data, for us too. So by your own personal observation and experience, you're giving us data that's going to help us as we take these questions forward. So I'll conclude there. I think that Deborah Young-Hyman will have a few concluding comments for us on our next steps. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. First of all, I want to send my thanks to everybody who participated today, our presenters, our panelists, our moderators, our chairs, and you, everybody who has participated. I just want to tell you a little bit about next steps. So in addition to the high-level summaries that Alex mentioned, what I want to tell you is that within the next month or so, BSSR will have a behavior maintenance website, which will have the following information. It will have high-level summaries of all 4 workshops, and it will have a list of all the presenters with their contact information and a short bio which talks about their work. The intended purpose of that is to connect all of you to become collaborators and become, as Mike was indicating, a part of the community as we move this forward. In addition to that, you will find a summary. First, you will find a conceptual document about why we're doing this, why this is of interest to OBSSR, the Adherence Network, which Jane mentioned at the very beginning, Dr. Simone mentioned at the beginning, and the agendas for all 4 workshops, plus their high-level summaries, and a portfolio review. For those of you who might not be familiar with that, what it is internally at the NIH is we want to know what we're funding in this space, in the space of behavior maintenance. So it will give you an idea of the current state of the science that is being supported by the NIH. I also want to mention, in terms of stay tuned, that the Adherence Network NOCI, which is our call for proposals regarding adherence, broadly writ, contains a lot of the language you have heard today about needing more experiments, if you will, on behavior maintenance from the personal level to the community level, with particular emphasis on multi-level interventions and sustainability. So that is an opportunity for all of you. And again, you will have an opportunity because of the information of presenters to sharing ideas and moving forward. And I also want you to know that we are going to use your feedback through the cloud, word clouds, and questions you have submitted to shape what we hope will be a publication going forward that highlights the next steps in both research and practice. And once again, thank you all so much for this very rich and fulfilling day.